Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt and this is Cutting Through the Matrix on the 24th of January 2021. And as always, I like to say that I hope most of you, because I don't know, we can't all feel great at this time, but most of you are getting through the crisis, the manufactured crisis that's across the whole planet right now, and coping with it some way or another. And I hope too, as I've said before, that folk are starting to realize you'll need each other in small groups to get through this long-term agenda. I mean long-term, because everything to do with sustainability hinges. The climate agreement that was knocked back a little bit there. Every other agreement was kind of put on hold for a few years there, is back on track. But the whole point of the climate agreement, and it came out from the different groups involved over many years, and the Club of Rome especially, was rather open about it, was to blame humanity. You're the problem for the climate changes, even though you've always had climate change on and off in different ways for probably millions of years. So that doesn't matter though. An agenda's an agenda, and there's too many people. That was what they settled on at the Club of Rome, causing the problems. And so obviously, therefore, and I've said this to the climate agreement meetings, the COPs, they call them, Conference of Parties, that we're having every year, starting with the Paris Agreement. They said that basically there's too many people again. So that, again, they keep saying the same thing over and over and over. Sustainability, too many people. Well, how do you get them to stop doing it? Well, look, they said at the last 2019 meeting, the climate change meeting, they said that the people were not listening to them to do with sustainability. We're still consuming and all the rest of it, consumer society. And something more drastic would have to be done. Well, bingo. In 2020, you got their answer. You see their Pearl Harbor event, and away we go. So instantly the economy's crashed, which kind of stops consumerism, doesn't it? And plus people are get locked down, and these big spurts of lockdowns, which are intended to go on for years, by the way. And out of the end of it, will be a vastly different society with a good many people being on perpetual income from the government, basically. It's sometimes called universal basic income. The UN floated years ago, because the World Bank is generally behind any financial decisions like that to do with economies and so on, and the Bank for International Settlements. So they came out with that years ago, and they're doing it again too. Universal basic income. How do you get the people just to stay up while you bring them a crisis? You stop them from working; they can't work anywhere else. So you've got a good chunk of the population on universal basic income. A type of communism, remember, in a sense, because regardless if you're working or not and you're getting money from the state, then that's how the centralized system in the Soviet era actually worked. You know, the state supplied the wages and so on, or the income, and here you go again. There's nothing that ever happens that hasn't been done before in some form or another. It's just that most folk can't recognize what they're living through at the time. It's like communism. As long as you don't use the word communism, folk won't connect what you're living under now in some countries. Socialism, communism, it's all the same kind of thing. Stalin said that communism was just socialism in a hurry. And that's what you've got. And of course the ones behind all of that are the richest folk on the planet, because as a technocrats, it's far more efficient to have people in a one-party system doing what they're told, as they do in China. That's why they really favoured the Chinese system for the world. And that's not from me, that's from their own admissions and the Council on Foreign Relations, you know. The so-called establishment members. And you can see their point of view if you believe in totalitarianism, or a form of oligarchical control. It does make sense from their point of view, because having to cater to folks' rights is an awful nuisance. And you have to go around things and delay things, even stop certain things, certain plans that you have, because dash it all, that the folk have rights, and isn't that a nuisance? And so under emergency powers, which is a form of martial law, actually what it is, Emergency Powers Act, all your rights are suspended if you've noticed. And that's why they brought in this again, along with the COVID, suspension of all rights, crashing the economy, which is a war act. That's what you do against enemy states. You try to destroy their economy. Well, literally by order of decree by your own governments, they stopped all the economy and put thousands and thousands, maybe even millions of small businesses across the planet, no doubt about that, maybe even billions across the planet, complete out of business altogether. Never been done before. World wars didn't stop the economies and declare that certain things were essential, non-essential like that. But it's been done under the guise of an invisible threat that most folk apparently, if you get it, you won't know you've had it, and you'll have antibodies against it in no time at all. And as all medical studies have always shown, including this one too, your naturally acquired antibodies are far stronger and longer lasting than anything they can ever inject into you. So, or caused by anything that they can inject into you, compared to that. So yeah, natural immunity is definitely good. And it was very telling to me because, like everything else, as I mentioned since 2001, the hardest thing will be to hold on to your sanity as you go forward. Because big changes were made to be implemented and planned to be implemented. And you're living through them as they're implemented. All kinds of them, social changes, changes that make you kind of laugh in the beginning, and then make you rather scared because you see that you're being taught and told you better accept what you're seeing is not what you're seeing. It's what they tell you you're seeing. And they back it up with laws now and all kinds of nonsensical psychological warfare terminology like hate, So if you see certain things happening, or even being told to not to call something what it's called already, and always has been for a good reason, by your own governments, then you're in trouble, aren't you? You truly are in a strange Orwellian system, which, Brave New World was more passive the way they managed the people, and they drugged them a lot too, of course, with their happy pills and lots of orgies, etc., But in the George Orwell's 1984, you definitely had the boot stomping in the face of the peasant forever, the average person forever. That's what we've got happening now. You're being told by the authorities under martial law systems, emergency powers, to obey, no matter how ridiculous what you're being told to obey happens to be, and how detrimental it is to society, psychologically, economically, and every other way too. And you're being taught, to go along with this, even though the science, I think Dr. Vernon Coleman and others too, and I've said the same thing, science has got to be verifiable with testing and repeated tests and so on by other independent agencies. And that's how you come to empirical data, by constantly re-examining it and so on, and doing the same test and finding out what your results happen to be, using the same formulas. And of course that's not happening, as you well know. And you're told by these sources of information, the so-called official sources, contradictory stories, and lots of maybes and possibilities. When you get that, that's not science, that's opinion. And so it's a big agenda. But even the Lancet, the British journal, the medical journal, not the BMJ, but the Lancet itself is another magazine they used to put out for the British health industry, talking about jumping on board with the reset, the Great Reset idea, and the chance to renew everything and get back on track with the climate agenda, etc. And all the things to do with fossil fuels, all the completely politicized. A magazine that's supposed to do with just basic health, totally politicized for a political agenda. Just astonishing to see that coming out too. So openly, I should say, because years and years ago I mentioned that everything's politicized. You don't realize it when you're living through it. I mentioned too that, like Jack C. Lowell, who was a great philosopher, in fact, who wrote the book Propaganda, about propaganda, you see, and how it's been used forever by experts. He touched on Bernays, of course, who really used his techniques and marketing skills for propaganda purposes, for governments and private corporations. But Lowell said that you're brought up with, it used to be novels. You see, novels were the big thing before you got radio, then television, and then you had all three combined. But whenever you see anything to do with police and detectives and so on, it says that's propaganda. You've been given a fake reality of what it's all about, what policing's all about, and detective work's all about, to make you believe that they're all out there for you, you know. And he said the same thing with medicine. He said television dramas, series, and things like that, which were awfully important in the 60s and 70s and 80s. All the identify with the characters in the hospital. They can't sleep at night because, you know, they want to get up in the middle of the night when an idea hits them to cure this or that patient. They're not in it for the money or anything. And, you know, and same with pharmacology. And in those dramas too, they bring in pharmacology, the latest drug. Oh my goodness, and everybody's crying, and it just cured this family's little boy or girl. He said the same thing. This is how propaganda works. It's mainly through fiction, and it's so much padding of every story that you see through fiction, whether it's a movie or TV drama. It's so much padding of political correctness, the latest updates on what's now normal. You see, and what now you should think of this that maybe you thought something before. So your opinions have to drastically change to be acceptable within society and your peer group, who are all being altered at the same time by their masters, unknowingly, a lot of them, you know. And that's how it works. It's quite a simple thing, but it's so prevalent through everything, absolutely everything. And you can actually see, if you look back in old movies, you can see like wave changes. This is the next wave for this change, next wave for that change, coming into the actual movies themselves, very innocently at first, and generally initially, if it's to do with sexual, anything at all to do with sex, or even genders and so on, is introduced through comedies. That's how it's done, because it seems inoffensive somehow. You laugh at it as if you're laughing at something that can't be bad, you know. And initially, that's how you get. It's always done the same way, through starting with comedy. But when you look into the Department of Culture in every country, actually, many years ago, I said, well, why does every country under the United Nations have its own Department of Culture? If you are the people and you are the culture, why would you need a Department of Culture? Well, it's to guide the people into culture and to change it and direct it and direct to change. That's what it's for. And they give incredible arts grants out under the guise of art to all kinds of novelists, script writers, and movie writers, screenwriters, and so on. And they get paid extra bonuses and with lists of things to insert in their stories. And that's why you often say, well, what has this got to do with the story or that? And it's got nothing except propaganda and indoctrination purposes. But you're growing up through it. You've had it your whole lives, and most folk don't realise it. Unless you're wary for a reason, most folk, being natural, can't believe that's the extent. They think they're free, remember. Remember what Bertrand Russell said, that people will keep thinking they're free because their government tells them they are so. It's so simple, isn't it? And they used to always point to some enemy, some dark nation over yonder that was under beyond an iron curtain type thing, as those people have no rights and freedoms, and that's why they keep you back home thinking that you did, which is mainly bogus too. You had a little bit more extra leeway, but the same forces were still in action, monitoring and noting, you know, mainly in the West as well. But now you're seeing it full blown in the lockdowns and this astonishing fulfillment of what I knew back in, even the late 80s into the 90s, simply through bits and bytes, like everybody else is getting bits and bytes of information. But I wasn't into computers. But I did read an awful lot of newspapers, magazines, and books for sure. And you would get the gist of what was to come, without often explanations of why they must come. And before you even got, oh my God, you've got to get a computer. That was that was a message in all the mainstream media at the time. Isn't it naughty? There's all this pornography on the computer to entice folk into getting them. That was one of the big techniques that the marketers used. And now it's quite normal. Most folk are growing up with pornography, and all age groups use it apparently. And it affects them because whatever is introduced into your society, as they say in evolution and so on, and sociology, will affect society, alters society, just like basically cars alter society. The very fact you could just jump in a vehicle and move, and it became within the reach of other people. You know, if you could even get used and second-hand ones, but you could go a long distance in a car where you couldn't really do it with a horse so easily. And most folk couldn't afford a horse at one time because they're very expensive to keep and maintain, you know, with vet bills and things that happen with them. Never mind feeding them in the winter time especially. So, yeah, you had this bit of freedom where you could go travelling. So that affects society. Your outlook changes when you have that bit of freedom. And you got to remember too, it's not so long ago that people say, and I always use Britain because it's an example, and I grew up in it, but it's an example of how things change rather rapidly, but as the folk adapt to it, they don't notice it, so they don't see it being so rapid. They take it just naturally. They think of cell phones. They think they're born with cell phones already, you know, and they don't realise that people in Britain had different dialects, and it was interesting going through England and Scotland. And towns even 3 or 4 miles apart could have a different dialect from the one, because that's about the distance people could walk there and back in a day. That's how a journeyman too, a tradesman, that's where the journeyman came from, how far you could walk in a day, you know, to a work, to a job. But it's the same with average people too. How far could you go? And if people are working during the day, they don't have many hours in the evening, especially in, say, the early 20th century. A lot of people are still working 16 hours a day, you know. So you couldn't walk too far in your spare time, and you probably didn't want to be walking in your sleep. And you find, as I say, all those different dialects were because people were almost, in a sense, they get newspapers, but the fact is they were almost isolated in a sense because they didn't have big influxes of people coming in with different dialects. And it wasn't until radio came out, and definitely with television, that you had the big change. And people started to adopt and adapt into using what they called the transatlantic accent, which was the little joke they had, because everything you saw initially from the movie versions and TV dramas and series was mainly westerns and things from the US, old westerns and stuff. Until they developed this accent that wasn't really quite English, not quite American, a lot of them. Then over the years too, in the 70s and 80s into the 90s, a lot of the dramas they put out for the school children, about schools and so on, and isn't it fun and all the rest of it, it actually gave them new accents. It was inserted into the stories, and actors and actresses were taught how to use them. And then you found the people actually copying that all through America and Canada. Quite interesting. So as I say, you're living through constant planned change, and you don't even notice it. You simply adapt into it. But so everything that's introduced into society, any physical thing too, definitely changes society. Look at just the phone. When the phone came in, suddenly folk and businesses could communicate with people across their country and maybe even across the world. And suddenly you've got a whole vast different outlook on businesses altogether, and small businesses even in your own country, even in your own shire in Britain. Because now you've got more instant communication to do with deals and so on. So it definitely changes things. You adapt and change. So those are people who plan what technologies are to be really investigated for worth and use and funded into being, end up running a lot of the systems that now control you, definitely in high tech. And You look at the NSA. People talk about, Silicon Valley is now a force to be reckoned with. There's nothing out there on a big scale that isn't part of one big corporation. I mean, the one. They're all divisions of it. You couldn't have a separate NSA, separate from Silicon Valley doing its own thing. It doesn't happen. Any more than Facebook as an independent organization. These are all funded into being with front people generally. Front people are very important. And as I've said before, it's been exposed in the past and admitted so, that many corporations, big ones to do with the military-industrial complex, were funded completely through different budgets by the CIA, that then operates them and puts their own operators in to manage them. Lots of the big companies and corporations are the same. Same in Britain. Britain was doing it through MI6 and so on, MI5. Forever. And even before you had the term MI5, they did it too. So if you want to look at whatever term you want to use, include the modern term of deep state, that's always been here. And it never decided to let go its power over its control. What power ever just says, okay, yeah, we're going to give up power, you can have it. Doesn't happen. If anything, they must always increase their power. That's what power does to people. And how does it do that? It's more control. Power is control. And under the control, everything underneath it, including populations, must be controlled. That's what the internet was initially for. Get folk into it, they're dependent on it. I gave the same talks in the 90s to get folk dependent on it. Lots of little freebies initially, and look at that, look at this, and so on. And then get them used to putting all their information out electronically on a daily basis. That's completely pigeonholing them into profiles, you see. And then start roping them in. It's like a fishing net, where you have it looks like a big square when they cast it off into the ocean. But there's actually ropes, like a drawing note rope that you pull it and it tightens all into a top, just like a pouch, and tightens it. So everything inside it's trapped. Well, it's the same technique. And I said in the 90s too, that eventually they'll take all the freebies they give you away from you, knowing you'll still be hooked on it because you get used. People will continue doing things that are bad for them because it's habit and it's routine. The routine is very important in creating habits and for control of the people. So even when they know, well, this is maybe not so good for me to indulge in this or that or the other, they'll still keep doing it. And then, of course, then they end up making it mandatory for people to use it if you want to even get your banking done or bills paid or anything like that, especially under COVID. And so they've got it all sewn up, and that's control. It's all total control. I can remember, too, when people first started to hear about Al Gore, before they got to know more by the whole climate problem, as he called it, and too many humans, etc., and sustainability. The same stuff as Maurice Strong was pushing. They all belong to the same club. But Al Gore came out before that talking about, the computer, this internet is going to change society, the whole planet, and everybody will have to be on it, and it'll work wonders, and so on. He even took credit at one point. That was a big joke, even in the media, that he claimed he invented it, which was a real joke. But he was quite right in the fact they'd already had their big, massive meetings of how they would introduce this thing into the public domain, and how it would change society completely, drastically. And for those who control culture and society, it was too great an opportunity, obviously, for them to just let go away. They jumped on it from the very beginning. You've got to go into the history of the internet and ARPA, then DARPA, that managed and controlled it during the whole Cold War, All sides in the Cold War used computer systems and hacked each other and did all these kind of things to each other, listened to each other, even collected the chat amongst the different programmers and other sides of the world to try and analyze what they were thinking and talking about and so on. So everything was done eventually on the public in the West, like today, was already done during the Cold War, and how it would influence and change people's opinions and behaviours, and it certainly did. Just like the television literally stopped people from going for walks. Couples used to go for walks all the time in Britain, but before TV. And suddenly this TV comes in, and there was nobody going for picnics in the park, and so it all just completely stopped dead, almost instantly. And you got all these reruns of programs that came from the States, old programs that they got pretty well cheap, I guess, to watch television. And so it altered behaviour. Put that thing in the room and it altered behaviour. They did the same thing with the radio, the BBC, because it was really, the BBC was really a propaganda department for the British government. Still is, although, as I say, they sold some shares. They have these Crown Corporation shares, they call it, that's not available to the public. But it did come out a few years ago that a whole chunk of them had been sold to the CIA. And the BBC definitely has been at the forefront of all the big propaganda scares since its inception. And it's been used for wars in a big way for propaganda. And in between, too, for updating, again, your updates, your politically correct updates, what you should think today about this or that or whatever, and change your opinions and views on certain things, constant. But they also they found out that before World War II, they had these radio shows on BBC where they give you dramas, like a series of a drama, and every one would end with someone that they called the cliffhanger, where the hero was hanging by his fingernails on the cliff edge or something, knowing that you'd tune in to the next day to find out what happened. And it made folks stay at home rather than go out for a walk or whatever, do gardening. And so again, your behaviour was being changed. And they were doing surveys and all that at the time. Everything is done to the public. It is done intensely, using your own tax money right up to the present day, on your behaviour to see if it's working, whatever it happens to be. So you get that computer, then you get the cell phone, and the cell phone is just a miniature computer, really. And then folk chat about everything everywhere they go till your behaviour's changed again. So much so that a lot of them end up in car smashes are causing them when they're chatting away, and they forget where they are when they're driving. They forget where they are when they're in the middle of the stores, going down the aisles chatting away too, saying things that they shouldn't be saying. It's just astonishing to see how you adapt into it, especially things that are a bit outside of your basic ability to adapt to. You can adapt to bicycles quite easily, for instance. And then you can start to adapt quite a bit easier to still with cars. You were still in charge of things, and your senses were alert, you see. But when it gets into something to do with conversation, which generally only happens when you're static, you're not cycling or driving a car. When you're moving it, that's not quite so normal in nature, you see. Unless you've got a great pair of lungs and you can jog along and still have a conversation for 2 hours straight. But normally it doesn't work that way. So you find that folk lose it when they're in places talking about to someone else far away and forgetting that there's people around them that are just shoppers listening to these conversations. Astonishing what they come out with. And so, everything that's put into your environment changes you, you see. Just like that's why they gave you the face mask with COVID. It completely alters behaviour, and it fulfills many purposes. One of them, of course, is to stop conversation. It's very difficult to chat to anybody with a mask on your face, and they've got the same. Everything's muffled. Everything's uncomfortable. The people that want to pull it off all the time. You can see even on clips on the internet from the TV I don't have TV, but you'll see that, and they keep pulling it away from their nose, trying to get a breath, because eventually the moisture from your breath clogs up the little pores in the mask. It makes it harder to get oxygen, which your body needs, believe it or not. It really does need it. And which brings me around to one topic I'll just touch on tonight too, is that it's two topics. Well, it's two articles. One of them's about, you probably read it, about that some experts are now advising that you wear two masks. And I daren't even go anywhere asking where the second mask is supposed to go. But the other article is about speaking can spread COVID. Speaking, you see, can spread COVID. I've already had it when they started with singing. Well, you can't sing anymore. It can spread COVID because the particles might travel further, they said. And so they've come out with the same thing now, but talking. So now it's best not to talk. Wear a mask. Can't breathe properly. And you can't talk now, because you'll save lives by shutting up. And of course, if you shut up, you can't spread any information about, or even questions like, why on earth are they wearing these darn masks, and suffocating ourselves? But then there's the answer to it all, right? It's obvious now. It's starting to get the picture. If breathing is bad for the environment and for spreading COVID, I guess the answer, right, is maybe there's a logic. We just stop breathing. Is that what they want? It wouldn't surprise me, because the Keystone Cops are truly in charge of the sciences right now. And getting back to what I'm saying, though, is you have no idea, as I say, that your behavior is constantly being altered. Constantly. And why do you think it's harder to talk to a previous generation? Number one, they've been taught that they're old. Especially in the Western cultures, they're old, therefore there's no point listening to them anyway, they're valueless. That's what you're trained to believe. Of course, that comes through dramas and the movies and so on. They're all senile, obviously. Anybody with an odd opinion is old is obviously senile, right? Whereas in other cultures, the cultures that will succeed, by the way, the cultures that have strong family, because you don't realize the West has been under incredible attack to destroy the family for a long time. The same targets, it's always the same targets. But in cultures like China or India and other countries around those nations, you'll find that they have strong family units. And they respect the elders. Often the elders they still live with them. A great thing when you think about it, in cultures where they're not killing each other because they're all closed in together, compared to the West can hardly get along with anybody, even one person in their home these days, But in those cultures, they still have a discipline of the culture, and the elderly have a big say in things. Sometimes they're the ultimate say in things. And so they're respected for their wisdom because they have lived longer. They've seen the cons that governments pull down through their lifetime, and they can pass it on to the next generation. So they're really regarded with a bit of awe and respect. But in the West, it's completely different. You've been taught to almost despise them, or throw them away into these homes and try to forget that they're there. And it's a sad thing too. You realize what you're missing out on. The children don't miss it. You were children. Well, the whole point of it is you used to have the elderly dying inside your own homes at one time. So they all lived together, and they were part of the family, and the whole family saw what was happening. And you truly grew up with you had more maturity about what life's about, and respect as well. About the fragility of life and the shortness of it. When you're a child, a day seems like a month. It seems so long. You pack it full of thoughts, and you're traveling at 100 miles an hour. That's how you are, basically, in your mind. But as you get older and you realize, life is pretty short. So when you had the families in your own midst there, you realized that part of you is leaving you forever, when they were dying. And you right to the end, Undertaker came to the house and would often deal with the corpse in the house and get things ready. And then it was left there in the coffin. And then once the usual rituals are over and done with, it's taken out and buried. That's how it used to be. This is an ancient history. If you were talking to a 20-year-old today, they would think, oh, that must have been 100 years. No, it wasn't 100 years ago. You realize how the state under socialism has taken over the responsibilities of the family, partly to weaken the family and ultimately destroy the family. You've got to remember, too, when even the welfare came in Britain, as an example. I use Britain because it's a great example of socialism. And I call it capitalistic socialism because the capitalists run it, you see. It's more efficient for them. So you got to understand how all these things came to be, how they came to pass, who benefits, who gets destroyed, and what agendas are being accomplished, because it was no secret amongst the left wing. And now I'm not talking about the working class left wing, I'm talking about the folk who ran the left wing, and they were certainly not working class people. Again, the destruction of the family unit was part of their agenda always. You can read it yourself in the Communist Manifesto. I can read it too in the various writings put out by Julian Huxley, again a member of the aristocratic class in Britain, who was a co-founder of UNESCO and so on, and many others. I mentioned Bertrand Russell because he was one of the ones who was really pushed in front of so many of them as a star. The star-making machinery of elevating them into stardom. This was even done back then, that's how it was done. Same with Einstein, Bertrand Russell. And today it's the same thing. They pick certain scientists and make them stars using the star-making machinery, lots of money behind them, promoting them everywhere you look, and not just a person. Even Fauci, they've used it on, So he's not just a person, now he's a genius, and they've got articles like the women are just swooning over him. Oh my goodness, like a rock star. This is the star-making machinery. It's all bogus. But it works awfully well to imprint in people's minds that these folk are somehow super special. And so when they say something, you should follow them and do what they're told by them. And that's how it's always been. You don't realize that so much of the past was complete fiction, really, that you swallowed as reality, including the whole entertainment industry. As I've mentioned it so many times before, they give you what's supposed to be popular today. They tell you what is going to be popular. And the people at the time would say, that could never become popular. Well, if you play something enough, especially to the right age group, at a certain age, a specific age, it'll stick in their heads forever, They can make anything popular, you see. It's quite amazing to watch it and see it happening. Until you get away from the idea of what music is altogether into just noise eventually. Then you get into just electronic distortion and noise. Until now you have almost melody or tuneless songs out there. There's nothing to remember in them. It doesn't stimulate pictures in your head. It doesn't stimulate the beauty of existence. Which is not always there, mind you. It's because we don't live in a constantly beautiful system. A lot of it's rather evil and nasty, mainly by outside powers again. And by that too, I'm also mean your governments. I always regard them as outside powers because they don't really seem to belong to the people they're ruling over in their agendas. And even the fact that you call it our government, what are you talking about, our government? When Quigley and others have admitted that the top members and the cabinet members of all governments in the West and in the so-called first world countries are chosen in advance by people you never meet and never hear about. It's definitely not what they call the selection committees. They're picked in advance by the establishment that Quigley talked about and always had been pretty well. So life is a show, you see. And I always think I mentioned it quite a few times before about Shakespeare that said that all the world's a stage and we are but the players. And you see, we are scammed in this modern slavery system that Charles Galton Darwin talked about in his book, The Next Million Years, on behalf of the establishment. He taught there's always been slavery. in one form or another. And he says, I don't see why they should ever not be. In other words, it would continue. It's wage slaves, whatever. You feed yourself, you earn money. Rather than have guards over you, you buy your clothing yourself. So you save them money, because they'd have to send people out to get the clothing to put on the slaves, and hire the slave masters to look after them and whip them into line. And so you pay for all. You pay for the police. You pay for your own clothing, your food, and your heat in the winter. If you can get the heat, that will shortly be reduced now that they're really cracking down on different forms of heating, just to exacerbate the whole COVID problem. Because this COVID, the whole war with COVID is to change society. Remember, that's what's about sustainability. A more post-consumerist society. They've been quite open about it. The Great Reset and Klaus Schwab at the World Economic Forum. And all the other organisations parroting him. As I say, even the Lancet in Britain parroting the same stuff. And so you're going through incredible changes, plan changes, and you have been your whole life and didn't know it. You had little, almost would appear to be periods in your own life, perhaps. You think you're kind of languishing, that not much is happening. And we had that in the West. Periods of that in the 70s, periods in the 80s and the 90s, when they gave you stupid programming on TV, really stupid infantile programming. And they gave you guys dressed with the tightest jeans till they all sang soprano, As it changed the culture and changed what you even wore, or changed what the impression of a male would even be, But silly juvenile stories to make folk adapt into them. Nothing happens by chance, because the fashion industry is completely interwoven with the culture industry, and the culture industry is completely owned and directed by those who project the future and plan the future. Remember that most revolutions are bloodless, or relatively bloodless. They're cultural, and it takes a time, like Gramsci, the communist, laid out how to take over countries long ago, and you infiltrate initially into appearing like them. The ones your targets are, you're them. And you get in leadership positions in culture, all kinds of culture, and politics too. And then you start changing through the generation, maybe even a couple of generations, and the whole entire culture, little bit by little bit, until the folk don't realize they've morphed into a completely different culture. It's very successfully done, and you're living through it again. You have no idea how much change has been planned that way and manipulated into being by professionals. It still is, the behaviorists, etc. That's why so much money went into behaviorism and psychology, not to help people, but to change, manage them, and alter their behaviors to suit the masters. Quite openly, and some of them too. Remember, there was a good documentary a long time ago, came out about psychiatry, and they touched on the post-World War II scenario, where some of the psychiatrists in the federation or the association they had in Britain, and elsewhere, they had one in the States as well, were demanding that they, being the only people who could, it's the same thing as you're getting today with truth. Psychiatrists would be the only sane people who could ascertain what truth was, you see. Isn't that, is that coincidence? It's not coincidental. So they had their own spokesman in Britain that was going to be appointed over politicians. And they would decide who would become politicians in order to prevent another world war. You see, it's a great excuse. Bring on the wars and then blame the people for, just like the climate, blame the people for it happening, and then appoint your own people and to direct the populations, because the people caused the problem. Such liars, really? Because everything's manipulation, including wars. If you were against war, why would you lock up all the people before World War II started, as an example, and the ones even in World War I who were dissenters, who didn't want to go off and get slaughtered or to slaughter anybody else. They knew how the British Empire had been created as an example, and who got rich from it, and who ended up paying the price was always the public, and paying it in blood and uniforms and as taxpayers. So they obviously said, no, enough of this. Well, they all got rounded up and put in prison under War Measures Act, without trials, just like the anti-terrorism bill, exactly the same, until the wars were over, you see. No trials, that was it. So there you are, and all that we're doing is what you're told after the war is the greatest thing, you're against war. Folk never figure that one out. Most things you don't figure out, in fact. They can't see this paradox you're always handed by those that rule over you. It's always paradoxes. It's always paradoxical, whatever the problem is. Just like the COVID too, for everything you read from the same professionals, you pretty well everything, you're getting two opposite opinions on it. Because it's mainly opinions as opposed to facts and hard facts, proven science. So yeah, the deep state's been here for an awful, awful long time. And they have no intention of handing it over or dissipating itself to bring the world a more free society that the public will be involved in. Sure. That's what they told the Soviets, And the Soviet people and under communism had appointed leaders for every union, not for unions, but for every sector of work. They had their appointed leaders appointed by the Politburo, the head of state. And they'd speak for you. And they'd put forward your complaints and what you need and all that stuff. The same thing's happening today. Yeah. They're called non-governmental organizations. They're all appointed by the big foundations that are part of the real deep state. As I say, if they don't use the same terminology, most folk never connect the dots. But you have to look at signs and symptoms. It's like diseases. You diagnose the disease by the signs and the symptoms, the clinical expression of it all. And even that's gone out the window with COVID. It's all down to testing, just the PCR tests, And this top virologist came out and said, this is ridiculous. You've thrown clinical diagnosis out the window. You've got to have the clinical side of it. Observation, history of the patient, recent history leading up to it, and so on and so on. Signs and symptoms. So there's but the fact that it's been rushing on the same way, regardless of the massive backlash from the real professionals out there who have nothing to gain by saying what they're saying, when they're coming out with alternate facts about all this thing that's going on. It makes no difference. It's written in stone. I said this at the beginning. This is an agenda that's going to accomplish the whole sustainability mission of reducing you to poverty, which they call austerity. Of course, they'll have a class system in it, no doubt about it, a real class system. And of course, those running it all will be in the upper classes, or the middle classes, I should say. The ones who own it all are way above, they're above the stratosphere, so to speak. Not really, but so to speak, as I say, because most of them you'll never even hear about who they are. I really like Benjamin Disraeli's quote in his book Coningsby's. It was a novel, but he put a lot of truth into it. That's where a lot of the truth was written at that time. You get away with it in a novel form. It was dangerous back then, even to speak about certain things, because governments have hit squads. They've always had, and they're rather active during the Victorian era, And in that whole period, it was rather dodgy. You'd be careful what you said or even thought or expressed. You'd have accidents, and police it's like one massive monopoly, really, the whole system, which included the police as part of the monopoly. The nod came down, and the cops would obey whatever order they were given. You either investigate it or don't investigate it, or the third option is to investigate it and lead off into a false trail, you see, a dead end, or a question mark, and that's how it goes down forever. So he wrote about the system, and little quotes in the book he put in there, that the people don't know is that the people who really rule the system and the country and the nations, maybe even the world, but the people who rule the system is they're vastly different from the ones that the public see and hear about, meaning in newspapers and prime ministers and so on. Vastly different. And that's how it really is. And that's how it's always really been. I used to like looking at the different cultures. That some of the ones that Britain, when they went into South Africa, when they got the British taxpayer to fund the armies to go in, so that the Cecil Rhodes and others could get the gold and the silver for the establishment, you know. But they used they blamed the Boers for the beginning of the Boer War, and of course it was actually started by this private mercenaries that the Milner Group had funded in existence and told to go over and start it. Anyway, what you'd find with the Africans, the actual Zulus and so on, and other tribes around there, the British government would ask to meet the leaders to try to get cooperation, maybe even aid or whatever, for numbers. They would use them for skirmishes to actually put the native Africans in to different skirmishes, or even use them to start wars, just like colour revolutions today against another tribe, to weaken them. Nothing's new, as I say, everything's old as can be, the techniques. But what was interesting was you would have the officer speaking to who he was told is the leader. And there may be up to 8 or 10 people behind the leader. But what you realise, the person in the back row is actually the leader. And it's someone else in the tribe who's pretending to be the leader. They're not dumb. They're not dumb at all, because they've used these techniques on each other down through centuries as well, the different tribal warfare. And so you never tell them who the real leader is. And meanwhile, the real leader is watching his opposition. He's analysing the personalities of the characters that he sees representing, say, the British Army or the British government, the envoys and so on, and sizing them up. And the one in front goes through the questions he's going to ask this so-called British leader. And it's all pre-planned, the questions and so on, so that the real leader is standing behind him watching them react. He's looking at body language and the faces, did the eyes shift or whatever, certain things, are they speaking the truth? And that's how they sussed them out. It was really clever, you know. And that hasn't changed. It really hasn't changed today. We're given so many fake fronts for leaders in different areas that obviously, especially politicians. I mentioned before, politicians are generally not specialists in the areas they're appointed over. They're politicians. In Britain, they used to call it musical chairs. Sometimes twice a year, the cabinet would be shuffled. That's what they called it. So the politicians appointed over, say, the Ministry of Agriculture could be shuffled off to become the Ministry over Defence. They know nothing about either, you see. It didn't matter, because the civil servants beneath them are more important. They're lifers. They work in those departments for their whole life and their whole working life, and they give the handouts to the politicians what to say, what it's about, because they know what their department's doing. Politicians are almost superfluous. They're in a sense, they've been semi-important or necessary to deceive the public, because they're given basic skills eventually. The British government now sends them to acting lessons. And that came out a few years ago in the newspapers, and I read on there. And they're given discounts to continue these acting lessons with private coaches and so on, how to stand and look official or officious, and to look important and convincing, and how to put it across. It's deportment, in a sense, and acting. So it's quite fascinating to watch it being done, but the real leaders behind it, as I say, just like the ones who do the script writing for all politicians, the bigger politicians, the higher ups, they definitely know what the agenda is. Otherwise, they couldn't write the scripts, you see. And I've often said, well, just do away with the politicians and give us the script writers, because they seem to know what they're doing. So everything is affront upon affront upon affront, including the politicians, We know too from history that the ones who are appointed as officials who have some training in whatever they're talking about are generally the worst. It's like Fauci. There's a lot of people who, even the inventor of the PCR test, I put the clip up too, lashed out. Before he died, he lashed out at Fauci and called him all kinds of things because he knew him well and called him a fool, as a bureaucrat. Because most of these people who are appointed over us in medicine or whatever are really bureaucrats and not the top in their field at all. I remember talking to some consultants in hospitals, the top-ranking consultants, and they were chatting about different fields that doctors can go into, They're lucrative, very lucrative, but specialization is often very lucrative. But they also mentioned that some of the poorer doctors, meaning poorer in their abilities, are often advised to go into things like become to be a specialist for allergies, etc. Because you can't really go wrong. There's a limited amount of information on it. There's never too much new investigation into allergies as to, that's of any benefit to the specialist, because he's given a select amount of antihistamines and treatments for the problem, and he's got it's a good income for a lesser doctor who's maybe even dangerous in the field. By the way, that's it. One of them said. Because some of them are kind of dangerous too, so they can't do too much harm in that area of allergy, and but it's a good income for them because you get repeat returns of patients. So try this pill, and what do you think of that one? Yeah, I don't sneeze as much with that one. Okay, try this one, and that's just a roundabout of those different pills, you see, and ointments and things like that. But the public are given a completely different view of it all. Like, he's professionals. These are professionals here, you see. Again, mainly through propaganda, through movies and fiction. Like Jack Zilal said, all medical movies and dramas, all police movies and dramas are propaganda. And you can add into that military as well. There was the history of propaganda is phenomenal, and your tax money is used to make good movies to brainwash you, Looking at the old ones from World War II, I was rewatching an old one. It was with Gregory Peck. It was about an Air Force commandant in the US military stationed in Britain during World War II. That was a drama. And it was a standard script, a formula. I call they're formula scripts. Standard. You can use the same script in different areas of movies and so on, different of life. But the guy who's the commandant when Peck is sent in is to replace this previous commandant who's kind of cracking up with all the air raids over Germany and stuff, and he's looking after these guys getting shot down, and he's cracking up because he's losing members and young guys, and they look upon the older guy as a daddy figure, and so they resent when the commandant is moved off and Gregory Peck takes his place, and he has to re-win the respect and all the rest of it and become the new daddy. And a formula movie. These are formulas, you see. You can use it in the Marines, in the Army, in the Navy, the same scripts, and other walks of life too. But it's good to study them, and that one, I can't remember the name of it exactly, but it was one of the more popular ones. But in the talk that Peck gives to the squadron, they're all gathered in the hall, in the operations hall, and he's saying, and you will be going over to Germany, and some of your targets will be civilian. They were introducing the idea of what was really called total war. They don't mention the term, but that's what it's called. Total war, where in new warfare, all civilians are fair game and fair targets. And that was taught, I think, in Sandhurst in the 1930s for the first time. The officer training in Britain. They also trained people from other part of the Commonwealth countries in the same thing. But they also had taught a German officer came over, and he studied this concept of total war there as well, and took it back to Germany. But Britain was a country that came up with the idea of using it, where every civilian would be fair game to bring down the numbers, because all the civilians would be involved in war production for munitions and armaments and everything else, you see. But I was surprised to actually hear it mentioned, not as total war, but as you'd be dropping bombs on working facilities, and so, because that's where you stationed all the different workers for some of the factories. So it was much better, rather than just have the factories constantly rebuilt, to go and blow and kill all the people who worked in them, in their homes. But that's how they introduced it, again, as always, in a movie version, a novel version of us against them, you see. Well, total war didn't end there, naturally, because total war has never stopped, regardless of a war being on or not. There's always a section within society at total war with you at all times. Never mind all the previous medical experimentation that's gone on within your own societies by the authorities, done in secret, always initially in secret, on unsuspecting people. And much of it revealed eventually with when the time limit is up on the Official Secrets Act for stamp on that particular topic, whatever it happens to be. Some have never been released and can be constantly restamped for another 50 years, 50 years and 50 years, and on it goes. The same system is using a complete wartime scenario called COVID to achieve an end, which all wars do, is achieve a goal and end, and to fulfill societal changes. Remember that. All wars are to fulfill societal changes. As Quigley said too, you can do more in 5 years of war, because government takes charge of everything, right? Then 50 years of peace and using propaganda to get societal change. And this is what you've got happening with COVID. It's the whole sustainability agenda. Why else would you crash the whole economy by order, by law? You just shut down. Never been done in history before, shutting down a country or a planet's economies. And locking up the healthy to save the sick. Never been done. It's complete antithetical to common sense and rationale and previous medical experience. The terminology from the beginning was a war on COVID. You see. An Emergency Powers Act came into being, which means it's a war scenario. In a war scenario, you change behaviours of all kinds. It isn't just gas masks, like I've mentioned before, it's face masks. Then it's standing apart from each other. All these things are to change behaviour and to change rational behaviour. It's not rational to stand all this distance apart, you understand? And the more irrational they can make it, the more bizarre it's all going to become. And when it's all really bizarre, they'll push more demands and compliance, or we'll never get out of lockdown. Even as they're telling you, doublespeak, and the white man talks through, like they used to say in old movies, the white man talks with a forked tongue, meaning two different things at the same time, from the same mouth. The experts tell you that after your jabs and all the rest of it of compliance, you're not going to get back to normal. And you'll still have to wear the mask. As at the same time, the same people are telling you, oh, you get the jab and we get back to normal. You see, you can't live with contradiction. It's deliberately meant to be contradictory, to drive you crazy and anxious, creates anxiety. On the one hand, they want compliance, so they say one thing. On the other hand, they have no plan. They're going to get you ready that you're going to be in perpetual lockdowns. You can't please tyrants, by obeying. This is a war, and the war is upon not just your own countries, but every country pretty well. And out of it, supposedly, will come a reduced population, because you'll have definitely rationings to come down the pike in a full-scale war scenario. And you'll have to be awfully good to get rations. You see what's happening now with the internet. If you're targeted for some reason for spreading untruths, as they say, from the masters of truth, then you can be cut off of that, right? If you get basic incomes, you see, universal basic incomes, and there'll be more of the incomes getting dished out as time goes on, because more and more businesses are going on to thousands are getting lost all the time. I'll put these links up too to the articles I'm talking about tonight as well. I always do. So it's not just my opinion, it's from the articles. All the topics I mentioned. And so you're going to have incredible chaos. This will be a long-term effect for a perpetual change, a planned change, you see. And you already have scarcities happening across so-called third world countries that really have been living off the first world countries for a long time and actually kept dependent on them. It's true enough, you can take the basic independence away from a nation, call it all kinds of things, or they need their help, and before you know it, in a generation, they're completely dependent on you. These things don't happen there's many ways to wage a war and to take over countries, many ways. Old as the hills. Eh? And so you'll definitely have famine coming along as fewer and fewer countries are producing agriculture, again, thanks to all the big agendas and sustainability. And they were cutting back on farmland use and then changing it to biofuel. Remember that, Con, as well? Before they found all the oils and gas pockets in your own countries. Oh, let's create biofuel. But one third less food to consume because it's been made for biofuel. And then they cut back on the herds of meat and so on, because there's less feed for them. It's in biofuel. Long-term planning strategies, and it'll go down in history as, we just didn't realize, didn't foresee this coming. Absolute rubbish. What's happening, and it's been happening for years, is a wartime strategy being implemented before COVID came along. It's a climate, eh? And the excuses I've used really disgust me for COVID. They care about they care about the elderly. I've lost count of the articles over the years that's been published about the abuse of the elderly put into these elderly homes and basically drugged till they start drooling, end up with inhalation pneumonias from the drooling, from the drugs, and for the cheapest cost at the same time. And they have sores from the seats they sit on day after day. They can't get up and walk around. They have bed sores. These sores aren't just little, these are holes in their bodies at times. They get infected as the tissue breaks down because of a lack of blood getting to the spot because of the weight on the same area for prolonged periods of time. So don't tell me about the care for the elderly. The same authorities, the same deep state that rules over everything. As his professors coming out over quite a few years now saying, people are living too long and we should really bring it down at the life expectancy to maybe just after retirement age or around retirement. And the money could be used then for their pensions to help younger people get jobs. Every excuse under don't you get it? There's a war on you. And these professors are given all the airtime on televisions across the world. Just by what? By chance, you think? I've always said if they want to start killing off people at 65, which some of them have advocated, then why don't they do it by example and show us the way? It doesn't happen, does it? You see, there's a big distinction between them and you. And they make it very well. They're important. You see, you're being trained now, again, in this war scenario of what's essential, non-essential, who is essential and who is not essential. Lord Sumption came out. That was getting pushed recently. I read some of his articles too, when he was saying, well, everything that's happening now is not ruled by law, it's ruled by decree, and by opinion, and just, it's not law, that mass mandates and lockdowns and so on. But the same Lord Sumption came out, apparently on a TV show or something, definitely in an interview, and he was asked a question about someone. What does he think about the elderly, and the fact that the bioethicists, they don't have to use the term bioethicist because that's this new profession that works for the deep state to change who's valuable and who's not in society. And is a person at a certain age just as valuable as somebody who's younger? And he said, no, I don't think so. So he believes that it's definitely more valuable than other people, You're all being trained as population to start going along with expert opinions. Because eventually it'll be your turn. You're getting the point here. They condition their victims years in advance of them actually doing it on you. So when it's yours, I guess maybe they're right, Here I am, guilty me, says, I'm consuming food, oh goodness me, and I've lived a long life, and maybe I should do it the same. I feel bad, I'm not kidding you. You will, and I really mean this, you will see articles, maybe even now, of elderly starting to come out. Oh yeah, I guess I'm just in the way of things, progress. And this is going to come. They always train their victims before they do it to you. Isn't it? It's diabolical, that the whole system really truly is diabolical. There's no other word for it. They have no trouble in getting professionals to implement this across the board. And there's also a link I'll try and put up tonight. I've seen the whole thing yet, but it's a woman who's come out giving you the steps towards genocide, like mass genocide. You got to read them to understand what's happened in the past, and the steps that they take to encourage the populations to go along with them. Everything is preparation by the elites, the ones, the real specialists who run the show. It's preparation. The elite employ the specialists that do it for them. They're the scientific class. That's what Julian Huxley talks about. He said, and Aldous Huxley said the same thing. Their family was part of the ruling scientific class that serves the dominant minority at the top. So they make happen by managing societies and cultures and behaviors on behalf of those that controlled everything and owned all. And they never start, as I've said before, for those who really think about revolution, you better listen to the elite's point of view, like Albert Pike, And don't forget, he was in charge of what was then the World Revolutionary Party. They inherited it all from guys like Thomas Paine, who said in his own memoirs that his family came from a long lineage of world revolutionaries. This isn't new. And you can take it from their writings. This isn't conspiracy theory when they write about it themselves. Especially when Thomas Paine was a revolutionary who came over from England and then went over to continue it in France. So you've got to understand that things are vastly different than the way they're presented in your children's history books. And by that I mean up to the time of university level, still children's. These are the authorized fairy tale histories. But we pay for everything. We pay for the armies to go in. We pay and we pay for railroads to get put into countries, so that freight trains can take the resources out of countries and things. And then they make you feel proud back home of whatever this empire that you're told you're part of. You're told to be proud of it. Well, why should you be proud of it? Because you're paying for all. You're paying for the railroads. You're paying for the troops to be over there. The companies and corporations aren't paying anything towards the upkeep of all that. Public-private enterprise isn't new. It's pretty well always, all the big projects for the state to be in public. You pay for it all. And those who run the state take it all, all the resources. And they take the goodies and so on, and the profits. So I always say, as I said earlier in the talk tonight, I says, Shakespeare says, all the world's a stage and we are but the players. And I always say that all the world's a stage and we are but the payers, because that's our function. Now remember, again, cuttingthroughmatrix.com. You'll see my sites listed there. These are all my official sites. Take a note of them, and remember, you can help donate to me and help me tick along here, because we're going through the greatest changes you'll experience in your life are happening right now. You're living through the history of it all. And unfortunately, even as you go through it, and then maybe 10 years down the road, if they start lifting some of the restrictions, if they do, then if they've decided they've changed the culture enough permanently, and they might even keep it going for 20 years. But you've got to have people who remember what happened now, and the players that brought it into being, and the years and years of sustainability agendas, all the way from the Rio summit of Maurice Strong in 1992. Then the climate change was all part of it. It came onto it for sustainability again. To the present, you've got to remember all of this. Most folk won't. Most folk really don't remember much of anything that really happened in a big scale. They might be able to notice what happens personally to them, but they don't know the whys and wherefores or who's behind it. And they can't connect it to the other things too. They're all part of this big plan. So cuttingthroughthematrix.com, remember you can send cash, use PayPal, and check. And eventually I'll have to get in the bank somehow. And maybe post a few things off as well. But this is lockdown here, complete lockdown here in Ontario. And I know for a fact they want to keep it going at least up until through April. And they'll keep, again, moving the goalposts, as they say. That's the technique that Fauci's been using from the beginning. Although he's far more honest in the beginning, he wanted to lock you right down for 2.5 years straight away, like permanently, without a stop. Then he'd to back off there and lie a bit, and, well, maybe not, maybe we can open up here and there. Then he admits he lied before, and then you're taught to believe him again. Incredible times, Really incredible times. And I put these articles up where it says that Fauci lied already to the people. He's lied more than once to the people. And it's a noble lie, though. As I say, that's what they call a noble lie, because it's for your own good that they have to lie to you. Because you're children, Children, that's what you are. All the things that the South Africans, the Afrikaners were blamed about what to do with South African natives, blacks. When they say they were like, they're children, you can't tell them everything because they're like children. That's what they used to say, Your own governments are saying it to you with their front specialists. Well, we have to lie to the people here. We can't tell you the truth, because you're too stupid to understand. I mean, Fauci's pretty well said that. He says, don't think about this, he says, for yourselves. He says, just obey the scientists. Everything I'm saying here is verifiable by articles. I have them all here. I put them up too before over these months. But do you really want to go through life getting treated like a child on such major things? We can't tell you why we're doing this really, because you're just like children. And we don't have the time to explain things to you. You're too stupid. You wouldn't understand. This is from Fauci that said in the beginning of the thing last year, this probably won't really affect Americans very much at all. And he says, don't wear masks, he says. Don't wear masks, he says. You don't need masks at all. And then when the order came down higher from above him, he turns face and, total lockdown, wear face masks, and it's going to be a massive deadly disease, he says. This is from the best they can give you, supposedly. So you have incredible arrogance coming from this, the ones who are presenting it all to us. I'm sure there are people way above them. But the arrogance is still phenomenal. It comes out by the tonnage every day on news clips and news media. And probably on television too. Incredible arrogance, where they treat you like children. The very things I've said, the apartheid countries were blasted for using that technique on native populations. It's all been done on you. You're too dumb to understand, you know. Just obey it. Fauci also said, see, the agenda has always been to use the same system as China. China is very efficient, according to Justin Trudeau. He admires it because you don't have to deal with rights and things like that. You know, there's no other parties conflicting and arguing with each other. Just one party system, and so the leadership tells them to do something, it all gets done without boring about human rights and individual rights and things like that. They don't have that problem. And so he admires it. But not just him. Obviously Fauci does too, you know. When Neil Ferguson admitted that they'd already discussed at the SAGE groups in Britain that advises the government on these emergencies and so on. He said they already discussed the fact that China had got things under control, and that system of the Chinese methodology wouldn't work in the West because you had individuality, a different history of individuality in the West, and people probably wouldn't put up with it. And they were so astonished when their campaign of, I call it campaign of terror, that's what it is on the public through propaganda, when it worked so well, that they were bowled over at how fast democracy just gave way to authoritarianism. They were very pleased about it. That's been the newspapers, folks. Lots of them. So China is the model state. China was glorified by the CFR articles over many years, comes from Foreign Relations articles, for its efficiency. And of course, David Rockefeller was over the moon with China and praised it, regardless of any fallout during the revolution. He praised it for being more orderly and efficient and so on. See, this efficiency, the elites love efficiency, but again, individuality and human rights gets in the way of it, doesn't it? Well, you watch it all disappear, eh? All your human rights and basic, and the way you're treated by authorities of all kinds. Washed away instantly, isn't it? Where folk are afraid now to go out in the streets in case the police pick on them. Older folk are scared. Maybe you're not walking fast enough. Where are you going? I'm trying to get to this. And they're actually fining people who are not walking fast enough in Britain. Can you believe that? Can you believe that? But I can, because you see, you can't give that kind of power to police. You can't give them that power. Law has to be absolute law. Lord Sumption was right with that, as opposed to just rules, arbitrary rules, just piecemeal rules. You have to have law, and the cops have to be taught what their limits are. Without that, you see, you're seeing what's happening. In some countries, they're having home invasions by police because they're claiming there's tipsters, or somebody tipped them off. There's more than 2 or 3 people in that house. Really. Because when you pull cops in for something like that, these cops can use lethal force on people. You know that. They don't come in. They're not negotiators for sociology here and sociological problems. They're not negotiators. No, they come in with a mandate and it's obedience. Do what you're told. The things they wear around that belt on their waist are not Bibles or how-to negotiate books or human rights and its history. None of that's hanging around the waist. What do you think's hanging around the waist there? And so you've seen the rise of a massive Stasi. And talking about Stasi, the rise, or really another division of secret police, which is what they had throughout the Stasi system in Eastern Germany. And the KGB had other branches apart from just themselves. They had other divisions that were similar, all through society. And we've been heading this way for a long time. When Pierre Trudeau came in, before he left office, he created the CSIS group for Canada, a secret agency that works within Canada. That's how it got created. And Trudeau was left to Karl Marx, Pierre Trudeau. And you had the same thing with when Obama was in. He wanted to create an internal army. Remember all those articles in the newspapers? And here they're doing it again under Biden. Oh, no, we have to do it because all these crazy people that were storming, they call it storming the Capitol building. That was no coup, that was no revolution. The ones who got in initially were a small group, and the other ones were encouraged just to follow them in. They fell for it all. They were getting prompted for years by certain leaders who helped the whole setup. Thousands of ordinary people there who were just ticked off and had been neglected. That's why Trump got in the first place. Massive segments of society still remain from free trade. Lost their jobs, lost factories, lost everything. Watched their towns go downhill, lack of funding and so on. The same folk watching massive influx of drugs in their systems, in their areas, as you say, or their states. And let's not pretend that wasn't bad before Trump got in, They already had documentaries about Seattle that's dying and things like that. They had the ones to do with OxyContin, the drugs that were getting pushed for all over America, but certain states more so than others by design, I think. Disastrous. All parts of it. These are wars, people. These are techniques of war. And there's no doubt about it, the countries that the present drugs are flooding in from. War. It's a war upon the people. To bring them down, to alter them from some kind of society that's in control of itself to an extent, and including mental health, and then destroying them. That's war technique, you see. And you think I'm kidding about that? Look at this, the studies that were done on how to take down Russia when it was in Afghanistan. You start reading the books, by guys in the CIA who are now, retired or dead now, some of them, and how they decided how they would, if they could embroil the Russian military, give them a Vietnam experience, that's what they called it, in Afghanistan. For years, it would bankrupt them even more. It would destroy their ability at home to get support of the people. The more troops were sent over who were getting killed, but even more so towards the end. They showed years ago on TV a documentary put out by Russia themselves in preparation for them collapsing. But they showed you these massive hospitals full of drug addicts. A lot of them had been the guys who got put on the drugs in Afghanistan. Other ones came back with the drugs. They were hooked as well and created the supply lines back into Russia proper. All planned out and talked about by the CIA before it all happened. How to do it. Drugs isn't new for taking down civilizations. Some of the top characters you have in the US right now are descendants, their family lineages of the Opium Wars, where they dumped the bales, thousands of the bales on China, until China had to let them in to supposedly do the trading. It was really plunder them. When you had British quarters, American quarters, French quarters, and so on. That's how that's how they edged their way in. If you don't let us in and to get your resources and so on and do forceful trading, gunboat diplomacy they called it, then we'll just drug all your population. So they literally unloaded thousands and thousands of tons of bales of opium that had been produced mainly in the Golden Crescent, I think they called it, which included Afghanistan. The good poppies were always traditionally grown there in one way or another. And then, of course, they develop and create into cakes, etc., and the processing. And some of the politicians, when they looked into their documentaries going through their histories, showing who was who and whose grandparents and great-grandparents and so on were involved in The Opium Wars. So yeah, don't think your own countries in the First World are way ahead in using these techniques. And they're using the same techniques on their own populations now. I can't really call them their own population. I think Bertrand Russell was quite right when he said that the elite, through their very careful breeding process, like selection and mating to get the right offspring, is very eugenically minded, you see. He said that they become a different species eventually, the elite. They'll know everything that's really happening. They'll dumb down the rest of the population, but the elite will actually get higher in IQs and understand what's going on. But the rest of the people would have to be dumbed down through diet, injections, and injunction. That's from his own book. You know? Well, I think that's happened, really. I think that's really happened. And you're living through it now, aren't you? So you can't really say that the folk who are representing you are the people who really are representing you at all. And I've always said intelligence agencies are one world agencies, that they're all combined long ago, maybe even from the beginning. And they really don't have your countries at heart, or the best interest of your countries, obviously. They don't have your best interests at heart at all, when they've given you colour revolutions inside your own nations. And getting back to the elderly here, year after year, I've talked about the death rate of retirees in Britain, where it's been normal for years now. New normals, we're always getting new normals, you see. As they train you in this new bioethics, as they like to call it, how to manage the people, and who should live and who should die, and who's expendable and who's essential and who's not essential, etc., etc. You'll hear more of this as they train you for your final end, actually, as I've said before. But they prattled on about the elderly every year and who are dying in their homes because they can't afford the fuel for heating themselves in the winter, until hundreds and hundreds, maybe thousands die every year in England, and it's normal. And this is from a civilized society, supposedly. It's utterly disgusting. And so this show of care, we really care about the elderly. We're going to change the whole world and lock down your economies and stop your economies and lock you all down your homes because it's to save the elderly. What an incredible lie from the same people who tell you, well, certain folk, we can't just pay for the fuel for everybody to live in their homes in the winter. This is from people who worked all their lives, can't afford the fuel. And Great Britain, I guess I'm glad they dropped the great part, but that's normal. So they can't come out and start using the elderly like they care, because they have never cared about the elderly. This is an agenda for a different reason. Then they'll tell you, if you try to say we shouldn't be locked down and a whole bit, etc. Oh, it's because you don't like the elderly. This is from the same foul-mouthed characters we call the politicians, who'll parrot whatever they're told to parrot by their masters. Yeah. They don't care a darn about the elderly. And even when the shots are being given, like the ones in Norway, and they're admitting it in different countries already, so many died after getting the shot. It's got nothing to do with getting the shot. They were going to die anyway. If they're going to die anyway, why would you give them something that has been shown to be rather lethal to them, perhaps? And this is a massive enterprise to change so much of our perceptions and the way we view everything and our behaviours, everything, this total war scenario. But why would you give it to the really frail, and actually use the terms frail and elderly, who are on the verge of dying? Why would you be giving them the shots then, unless you're doing some big experiment? Huh? Because you don't give a damn about the elderly. It's so odd to be been at this for so long. In the 90s, I went through the histories of I have to use the term the unborn. I don't think you're allowed to say anything different anymore. This because we're under such free society, right? But I said the whole point of this, the abortion, it wasn't for what they said it was. It was to change society's perceptions again on what humans are and what life is about. That's the whole point of it. I said eventually they'll start on the elderly. So they start at one end and until it's fairly regular, normalized, and then you start on the next. Well, why bother keeping the elderly alive, you know? And then comes euthanasia, which we have in Canada now. I mentioned last week or the week before about the 90-odd-year woman who had no comorbidities, by the way. She was healthy and ambulant, the whole thing, who decided to accept euthanasia because she couldn't stand being isolated during another lockdown. And they gave it to her. They killed her. And they tell you they care about the elderly. Oh, you're starting to think for yourselves for a change. You know? They care about the elderly. When Obama ran, in his time, his first time running for office, I listened carefully to the little bits he came out with, because that's when they tell you little things of an agenda, you see, little parts. Trump was the same with his pharma business. He said he was going to back, because they were backing him, right? He says, and I'll cut all this testing time out, etc., for all safety things, and they'll rush necessary things to the public, medications and so. He also meant vaccinations, folks. Huh? It's a coincidence. Well, when Obama ran the first time, he said, he gave an example of his mother or grandmother. He says, is it really, the money it's cost to keep her going, is it really worthwhile spending that? And he made it published in the papers. It told me it was a big thing we're supposed to start thinking about. That's what really, when it was in the papers, it was telling me. What's the mantra from the climate change agreements? And so, too many people. What's the mantra comes in with COVID? We've got to ration medical care and stuff. It's in the Toronto papers again, Canadian papers, Ontario, and a recirculation of what they gave us last year, because Canada was one of the first countries to get the bioethics report. Make sure you get this in stories. We'll have to start rationing care if it gets any worse, and decide who should live and die. It's a sad thing to do, but we have to do it if it ever gets that bad. This is all getting you ready for your essential, non-essential, etc. Grading you all and getting you to accept it. And it's true, the world's a stage, because everything they show you is a show. It is a show. Produced, written, directed, and produced show. Every little thing they give to the public, it doesn't just come out spontaneously from anybody. You're living through an incredible show, the greatest show on earth, right? And it is. It truly is the greatest show on earth. They have no end of people coming out to talk about the different folk in Norway and other ones in old age homes that died after getting the shot. That's probably got nothing to do with the shot. That's really scientific again, right? And what's the one truth you'll get in any detective story? It's propaganda, right? But what's the one truth you get? Is that it's called common sense detecting, where you find out, all the characters involved around the character who's died or whatever in the plot. And you also have to find out too what happened before they died. Did they upset somebody or whatever? Who had it in for them? And you'll sit and get glued to that. I can't stand these murder things, But it's the same thing in real life, You have to get all the hard evidence. They call it hard evidence, not ifs. Hard evidence is proof, you see, really. But we're given opinions and maybes and perhaps from the top scientists here. It stinks to high heaven, the whole darn thing. Absolutely, And so we don't think this is what's killed them. It's probably due to their age. Well, if they were teetering on the brink of death, why on earth would you be sticking this thing in them in the first place at that time? Huh? See, it doesn't jive. It doesn't make logical sense at all. unless they are testing out some big thing. Or going even further, because there's people raising that G word, genocide word up again, and do you blame them? Do you really blame them? The West, we're the countries that started eugenics. And London, of course, was the big one for it with Darwin and his group, and the British Eugenics Society, and that spawned a whole bunch of new directions in different pseudosciences and universities, and the Malthus doctrine, etc. And again, superior, inferior, which was no problem with the British aristocracies, nobilities, because they already saw the people as a separate species. They did. The peasants, the villains, as they called them, What would you know? Mind your place, They did see the ordinary folk as a different species. They really honestly did. I'm not exaggerating there. You have no idea of the class system that Britain had. It's still there today, but a bit more camouflaged, They've got better managers of information. But I've talked to people from India, well-educated people from India who talk about the upper classes and Brahmanism, etc. And they came to the same conclusion I had long ago, that the reason that Britain was in India for such a long time was they got on so well with the Brahmin class. Their aristocracy, nobility got on so well. They could identify with each other very, very well. And they saw the rest of the population as just almost subnormal peasants. The same as Britain did. That's a fact. And the elite in India lived off the backs of everybody else with taxes and fees, feudal duties, etc. That's where the word fee comes from. Feudal taxes, fees. And the British aristocracy, they would get appointed to different positions over areas in India, worked with the Brahmins, and they shared the loot that came off the people's backs, the taxes and so on. Big money. And people tend to look upon India as just some backward. No, it's not a backward place. They got a massive population, massive, ancient culture. And many cultures involved inside India, hundreds actually, from small tribes they're from the Dravidian groups and so on. But you got to realize that it's one of the largest middle classes and upper classes in the world because it's got such a large population. I don't know if I mentioned it before on the radio show. It was a documentary really about some of the early film, colour film, and cinema, for home cinema use, by the way. They had it in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and it was created in France at the time. And I like photography and so on, but it was fascinating how really good colours and so on it was too. But they did it for film, actually for home video film as well, for holiday makers and so on, tourists. And one was about Rosie. Her name of her was Rosie, and she was a friend of the British royal family. Her family was awfully rich, Rosie Neumann, I think it was, Mrs. Newman, and she was well acquainted personally with all the royal family, and we were friends with them. But she did nothing but except travel when she was a young woman all over the world, in the best of everything, and from her, so the whole movie was about the colour photography. She left us a lot of good film about the world at that time, and she showed you incredible footage, video footage of some of the top Maharajas, aristocracy of India, where she visited and stayed in their palaces. These palaces were massive, like about 20 football fields together, and white kind of almost like a marble, kind of what it was. And they showed you these endless trains of soldiers almost like medieval soldiers, the way they were dressed and classic outfits, etc., ceremonial outfits with weaponry and so on elephants and so on. And she's witness to all of this, one of the last people to actually film it all, maybe the first person to film it all in colour. But no, India was incredible. Why do you think they went into India? A nation where they have incredible wealth with riches, gold and all kinds of precious metal, but gems galore. And you see them wearing the gems at the Brahmin weddings. They can hardly move with the weight of them. I mean, you're talking about incredible wealth. Well, that's what the aristocracy of Britain merged with at that time. They were quite pally with them because they had so much in common. They all lived off the backs of everybody else down below them. And they lived awfully well and saw themselves literally, again, as a separate species. And that tied in so well with Darwinism. Oh, well, we're special because we've been careful with our selections. So we're marrying into money that was acquired by families who are obviously more intelligent than other people. So our offspring will be passing on will have these traits passed on to them. That's basic eugenics in action, and you're living through it. But it didn't stop there. It didn't stop. Oh, we've given up the class distinction stuff, No, that didn't happen. They camouflaged it in Britain and elsewhere. And out comes sustainability. There's too many of these folk that won't go into the new society, this great new society. They call it the Great Society, by the way, You hear the top politicians sometimes refer to the Great Society, and folk never say, what do you mean by that? Define it. Well, the Great Society isn't just a world-type system run by a clique at the top. It's also an advanced society that the real socialists, because socialism they pretend is a science that's completely merged in with eugenics, by the way. George Bernard Shaw and H.G. Wells and all these characters and the people who funded them and created the Fabian Society as one branch of their system. You got to get the working class to believe that you're there for their benefits. Eugenics, you find that that Bernard Shaw and others in charge of the Socialist Party said that the average worker in Britain that would support them really think that the rights were winning for them are going to help them be more comfortable in their family life. He says that nothing's further from the truth. He says, we plan on getting the women out of the family and abolishing the family. So all these poor characters that were saying, yeah, this Fabian society, this Labour Party is great for us, I had no idea that the elitists at the top had no intention of making life better for you. They wanted to literally smash it up and divide and conquer again. And ultimately start reducing the population. H.G. Wells said it too, all these workers passing by the windows on their way to the factories, leaving dust on the streets, and these miserable creatures and so on. And we help them get better food, we help them. And what did they do? He said, they breed. These are your top socialists. The folk don't catch it. They don't even know what they follow half the time, And that footage that was put up about Rosie in England, they had it on YouTube. I don't know if they still got it up there or not. I may have a search. I think I might have put it up years ago too, because it's fascinating to watch it. She even she traveled the world, the life of luxury, by air and ship and all the rest of it, and princes would literally send their big chauffeur-driven Rolls Royces in different parts of the empire out to meet her and take her in and so on, including in India. They did that too. And she took it all for granted, this natural way for her. She just completely took it all for granted. And they actually commented to her, put it all together, eventually put it up. So they commented on the fact she didn't know at times what she was even looking at, She was looking at pretty colours and things like that of ceremonies. She went to Scotland to see how the Scottish peasants lived with with their Highland games that were put on there, and she saw them throwing the hammer and stuff like that. All very quaint, how the little people live and all that. But over in, I think in South Africa at the time, she visited there, I think it was South Africa, and people know the whole movement by Gandhi started there. Because Britain, the elite of Britain, that used the empire, it shows you too, they used different groups or ethnic groups over other groups, and they brought in people from India to manage the African colonies, and also in the Caribbean countries too. They become the overseers of everything, and they become wealthy as the folk they were ruling over become poorer or don't get any further ahead. This is all worked out that way too. But anyway, Gandhi was trying to get more rights for the Indian workers in South Africa. And she didn't know it. She was filming a beach, and she didn't know that to the right of the scene, you actually see it. There's a guy talking to a crowd on the beach. That was Gandhi. She didn't know that. She had no interest in just more little people, I guess, to her, But what a life of luxury she lived, and really didn't think too deeply about it. But great footage left to posterity to actually see how things were in living colour way back then. Yeah. Good stuff. So before I start giving you any more of my prattle here tonight, let's mention that, again, getting back to the elderly, they don't fall for it. They care about the elderly. They didn't care about the elderly at all up until now, supposedly. But we're supposed to be all for the elderly too, because you're against the elderly if you speak out against this whole lockdown idea for COVID. Huh? Oh, you want the old folk to die and get... Come on here. The government said they care about the elderly, as thousands die in their homes every year and freeze to death. It's either food or the fuel. You see, the whole agenda for sustainability has been tested out in Britain pretty well in different phases, and at different micro tests, beta tests, and so on. And so they know how to manage it all. Right down to how many folk will start to complain and who will keep silent about folk dying on the lower classes if they start getting induced famine, because they've shut down the entire planet's economy. And it's so all they can do when you speak about these things, even from their own articles, is shout conspiracy theory. That's all they can do. They can't answer the charges. Conspiracy theorist. See, facts don't matter to them. So you got to start thinking for yourselves, because bad times are coming along the pike. And you've got to have little support groups, because don't look to government to help you in the really bad times. You should have little support groups, not many in a group, just enough there to help each other out. And the old story is true, that the two heads are more or better than one if it comes to a crisis. And you can put things together and figure a way out of things. Very important. And again, before I get off the elderly here, you're in total lockdown. They're celebrating the fact that the climate agreement's back on track. It was never off track, by the way. It's all a big show. Because I've read the articles with the states in the US, and inclusion with ones in Canada, the provinces, had bypassed the federal government years ago and were signing on to all the agreements for sustainability. Remember? I read them on the air years ago. So here's the ones who care about the elderly, right? In the middle of a coming food crisis, coming everything crisis, coming fuel crisis, and you got first thing, oil industry reels as Biden targets fossil fuels in the first days. It was planned way in advance by whoever put them in. And it says it cancelled the Keystone XL oil pipeline in Canada. It was run through the States. Thousands of jobs. Later that day, his Interior Department mandated that only top agency leaders could approve new drilling permits over the next 2 months. And next week, according to people familiar with the plan, Biden will go even further, suspending the sale of oil and gas leases on federal land where the U.S. gets 10% of its supplies. I wonder if they're going to bring stuff in from places like the Ukraine and You ever see the plans for the oil pipelines all through those areas that they're all over there with right now? Yeah. Across the Middle East too. Right? They had them going through the countries they've knocked out, Iraq, etc. They had all the pipelines and maps yet before they invaded. They showed you them. These were the plans for these, and even the corporations that would own them. Same thing across Ukraine and elsewhere. So anyway, it says the actions sent oil producer stocks tumbling and raised blood pressures across the country. So if they start cutting back on your own ability to heat yourselves in your own country during a complete lockdown that's supposed to last for years, what do you think is going to happen? It's going to exacerbate to make it worse. A full-scale war-type scenario you're going to see. Everything's going to be rationed. There'll be deaths. Oh, well, can't help it, you know. And they'll divert you off with silly stories about dancers or the characters that they've made stars that just do a dance, or they just take pictures with Harley and none. I mean, it's just astonishing the careers they can get now on the internet and doing stuff like that. But that's great diversions when really terrible things are happening. So it says, so the officials in the oil industry are worried because technical permitting decisions are being placed in the hands of political appointees rather than expert regulators in the field, and they're concerned that permits or simply changes to them will be delayed for existing drilling operations. And it says many interpret it as a prelude to broader actions, including the administration's plan to next week to impose a moratorium on all oil, gas and coal leasing across some 700 million acres, 2.8 million hectares of federal land. So the announcement is intended as a temporary ban on leasing and permitting, but is also a precursor to a longer-term ban, said Kathleen Scamma, head of the Western Energy Alliance. And this is your whole sustainability agenda. It's great. I mean, sustainability, remember, is about too many of you. You're getting the point. There's too many of you. They keep telling you like a mantra, too many of you. Not them, but you. Yeah. And I know from the trains that take not my house apart, that I'm so close to the tracks. But they did away with the speed of the train. It used to be a law that they couldn't go any more than 15 miles an hour past occupied, houses on either side. And they quietly did away with that. Now they're tearing down there at 70 miles an hour. Doubled up trains. This is big those big carriages are doubled, one top of the other. Sometimes 5 miles, 6 miles, and 7 mile long. There's no doubt about it. Because it can take maybe 10, 15 minutes to go by me. And they're flying. And the house is shaking. I mean, there's not a window that's not loose now. I've had bits fall off of the parts that hold the window in place, in fact, with the vibrations. Well, since the last year into the present, most stores are closed, right? This isn't for commerce. So what is it? Well, it's mainly food and so on for long-term sustainability or continuity of government, or definitely places where they plan to have wealthier elites, important folk all live, because it's not going into the stores that are closed. And I've never had so many trains per day as now, even when times were better before this 2007 and 8 crash. We're way beyond what it was in the so-called good times. At one time you get maybe 10, 15 a day at the max in the best of times. Now it's sometimes 30 to 40. Everything's closed down. So I'm going to just mention some articles here now, because it's interesting to read some of them. There's nothing really that new in a sense. One, as I've mentioned before, and I put it up last year. Then an update this came out last year too, but I got the old ones on it too, by the way. But pathogenic priming likely contributes to serious and critical illness and mortality in COVID-19 via autoimmunity. And it's interesting too, because they know what's happening and what's going to happen with the vaccinations. And then when you hit the wild virus, or the virus in the wild, as I like to call it, you can get an overreaction by your immune system that can end up killing you, because it'll flood the lungs with antibodies and all kinds of things that'll try to defeat the problem, including different phagocytes also, which will eat away at dying and dead tissue in the lungs, and it perpetuates itself. It's a massive overreaction. They've found before. So they know this can happen with certain vaccines, but it was interesting. I've said before, they didn't do they called off doing amongst healthy young patients, right, who had went through physical tests and the whole thing, and blood tests, the whole lot. They didn't give them the challenge test to expose them to a live virus afterwards. Because they said they didn't want young folk to possibly get ill. Well, what about the whole population? When we get the challenge test and hit real viruses, it doesn't have to be this particular coronavirus either. But facts don't really matter. But this anyway is a good enough article for those who want to plod through it. It goes through the biochemistry involved and how it works, etc. They mention the glycoproteins and so on, and what they think might be the cause of the overreaction is the priming of the immune system, which they observed during the initial SARS outbreak back in 2003 or so. And they did the animal studies too of SARS spike protein-based vaccines leading to increased morbidity and mortality in vaccinated animals who were subsequently exposed to the wild SARS virus. That's what I'm talking about. The challenge test is when you subsequently expose them after the vaccine. The problem highlighted to two studies became obvious following post-vaccination challenge with the SARS virus. They found that recombinant SARS spike protein-based vaccines not only failed to provide protection from SARS-CoV infection, but also that the mice experienced increased immunopathology with eosinophilic infiltrates in their lungs. I had that before when I got a whole bunch of vaccines in the 90s. It floored me completely, and it left me with complete rheumatoid arthritis and other problems too, and massive pneumonia, death of a good bit of lung tissue too. And so it says here that similarly found that, and I had eosinophils in the lungs too, by the way, by them. Similarly, it says found that ferrets previously vaccinated against SARS-CoV also developed a strong inflammatory response in liver tissue, which is like hepatitis response. Both studies suspected a cellular immune response. They found it as well, during the what they call the Spanish flu. When you read the reports there, and there's massive reports that were written by doctors that were really dedicated. I think they were actually more dedicated to the code of ethics and so on that they had back then as doctors, and do no harm, etc., but also find out what's going on. But some of them did a lot of autopsies of the people who died with the Spanish flu. And the first thing they noticed was how heavy the lungs were when they took the lungs out. Heavy, they were completely gorged, you see, with blood, as the body's immune system carried all the different killer cells to the site to try to kill off what it perceived as a massive attack. And so they die not so much of the infection, but the response to the infection. And also with bacterial secondary infections that set in. Once any lung tissue or any tissue really is damaged by the initial cause of a virus and is broken, the tissue surface is broken, then in come the bacterium, and that generally is what causes most damage. So anyway, you got this priming, as it's called, and this is an article from the Journal of Translational Autoimmunity, it's called. In this article, they talk about, again, they go into it in depth too for people who are involved in biochemistry, but they say that in the discussion, it says these results could explain in part the high rates of serious illness associated with SARS-CoV-2. They could also explain the lengthy asymptomatic period prior to presentation of symptoms characteristic of COVID-19, SARS-CoV-2 could impair the immune system or response. It could impair it, you see, initially at first, and then over time the immune system could begin to mount an attack on the myriad of proteins. Most of the identified human target proteins had low overall homology, but high local homology over short segments of their epitopes. The protein atlas results indicate that numerous proteins are expressed in a variety of tissues, as noted in Table 1. They give the tables too. Unintended consequences of pathogenesis from vaccines are not new. Now, remember this part, okay? Nor are they unexpected. They are unanticipated only if those who develop them do not include available knowledge in their formulation plan. For example, the H1N1 influenza vaccine used in Europe led to narcolepsy in some patients, resulting from homology between the human hypocretin, that was orexin receptor 2 molecule and proteins representing the vaccine. This was established via the detection of cross-reactive antibodies in the serum of patients who developed narcolepsy following H1N1 vaccination in Europe. Right? Then they go on about pathogenic priming may be occurring involving autoimmunity against multiple proteins following COVID vaccinations, like coronavirus vaccination. Is consistent with other observations observed during autoimmunity, including the release of pro-inflammatory cytokines such as cytokine storm. And similar to the SARS-CoV animal studies found that mice vaccinated against MERS-CoV coronavirus, Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, developed exaggerated pulmonary immunopathology when challenged with the MERS virus following vaccination. And reported that lung mononuclear infiltrates were observed in all groups after virus challenge, and that increased infiltrates that contained eosinophils and eosinophil promoting IL-5 and IL-13 cytokines were observed only in the vaccinated animals. Interesting terminology they use in this one too. This says pathogenic priming may be more or less severe in vaccine or infection-induced immune responses to some proteins than for others due to original antigenic sin. Interesting, original antigenic sin. The immunological reaction against self-antigens may be made less severe as fast-evolving viruses evolve away from the original vaccine type. And this is what happens in normal viruses, just mentioned there. You get multiple strains developing. Many of them, most of them actually, are less harmful to the people. But the idea is that once you catch the lesser strains of them, then you start to evolve, you get a quicker immune system response to it quite safely too. A natural herd immunity builds up, you see. So they're saying here that pathogenic priming may be more or less severe in vaccine or in vaccine-induced immune responses. So if you have this massive cytokine storm, it's more likely to be caused by the vaccine, right? As opposed to naturally acquired SARS-CoV virus and then your body's natural reaction to it. It says thus the screening of immunogenic epitopes from pathogenic priming potential via homology may be augmented by studies of autoantibodies that cross-react with epitopes included in the vaccines. That's quite an interesting little study anyway, and I'll put this one up for anyone who wants to look at it. And again, pathogenic priming, Journal of Translational Autoimmunity is an easier to read article here about it, so I might just put that one up for the people, and if they want the PDF, they can download it themselves, I guess. Now, the techniques too of treating us like simpletons, little peasant type, simpletons. It says the £500 COVID cash point. The politician, right, in Britain, right, they call them ministers. Minister I's astonishing plan to give everyone who tests positive for virus a one-off payment to encourage more swab tests at a cost of £453 million per week. I guess there'll be a rush to try and get positive test, That's from the Daily Mail, this one here. And so everyone testing positive for COVID could be given the £500 under dramatic plans being considered by ministers, politicians. And it's aimed at encouraging more people to undergo swabs and self-isolate to stop the virus spreading. Here's the thing, there's so many articles come out here by top virologists talking about naturally acquired herd immunity, and that they've already shown in some studies that your own immunity is lasting longer and kicks in quicker against the coronavirus without any side effects, right, for most people. So the scams are incredible. Every scam artist has got their hands out for some, even the public relations companies, the PR companies and so on, and marketing companies. It says, officials fear that too many with COVID symptoms fail to take a test in case knowing a positive result stops them working. Well, no kidding, And again, even though the PCR test is so bogus and unreliable, it's not supposed to be taken seriously, really, by professionals who are coming out in the droves and admitting this. It truly is for false positives. And all these cases are not sicknesses, they're just people who test positive. And again, with the PCR test, doesn't tell you if you've actually got it, if you've had it, and if it's actually from that actual virus in the first place. So it can't be certain that either. And back to the same thing too, test and trace. The test and trace thing, these contact tracers, is paying Deloitte, it's a company, I guess, nearly £1 million every day. A top-ranking civil servant at the Department of Health and Social Care told members of Parliament that 900 of the firm's consultants were employed, at a rate of £1,000. I guess that's each per day. Yeah. £1 million a day for test and tracing. Every shark's got their hands out, So it says David Williams, a top-ranking civil servant at the Department of Health and Social Care, told MPs on Monday that 900 of the firm's consultants are currently employed at the rate of £1,000 a day. Disclosure of the astonishing level of expenditure comes after parliamentarians were told that the department, DHSC, expected to spend £15 billion on coronavirus the next 3 months on testing alone. Do you understand why they must get the high numbers for testing? As I say, it doesn't mean you're ill or got sick or whatever, or you even got it. £15 billion, particularly the rollout of controversial rapid testing to tackle the pandemic. Every test that they're using is controversial, whether it's even effective or efficient or truthful. It emerged last year, that more than 1,000 consultants from Deloitte had been hired by the government, but Williams' admission to the Commons Public Accounts Committee is the first time the true cost has become clear. Incredible, Folk are going to come out of this as multimillionaires, and all these different scams are going on right now. But I'll put these articles up for those that want to go through them. Because it's most folk most folk can't handle the truth. It's hard. It's depressing if you let it depress you, because it's psychological warfare. A lot of it is, the whole lockdown is psychological warfare. It truly is, and physical warfare too, because so many folk are getting sick just by the lockdown itself. If your mind starts to get anxious, you start getting sick in other ways as well. And here's the article I mentioned about talking now. Talking can spread COVID as much as coughing, says research. Another big, multi-million-dollar study probably, as they throw cash out to all these con men that call themselves, we're really scientists investigating it. And it says, speaking to a friend when infected with the coronavirus could be as dangerous as coughing near them, thanks to lingering particles, research has suggested. Oh, that's worth it right there, Yep. So speaking, breathing out the air when you speak, you see, when infected with the coronavirus, that's if you're infected, right? Could, and again, there's your little escape clause for them, could be as dangerous as coughing near them, thanks to lingering particles research has suggested, and can be spread through a number of routes, including virus-containing droplets emitted when an infected person breathes, speaks or coughs. It's quite easy to stop them breathing, then they can't speak or cough, eh? How's that? Yeah. A factor experts said could help to explain why COVID seems to spread more easily in indoor settings. See, they try to get into the houses, so that there's no privacy anywhere. Well, as droplets fall to the ground over short distances, tiny droplets known as aerosols can carry the virus over distances greater than 2 meters and linger. I wonder how long they linger for. Can't they arrest them for lingering? I don't know. The rest of everything else, right? Now experts have developed models to explore the risk posed by large droplets and aerosols. You need masks, you need distancing, and you need good ventilators so these particles don't build up in an indoor space and they're safely removed, he says. There you are. This is from an expert in fluid mechanics at the University of Cambridge, naturally. And written in the journal Proceedings of the Royal Society, De Oliveira and colleagues reported how they built models that take into account the size of droplets emitted from infected individuals when they speak or cough, as well as factors including the makeup of the droplets and the time it takes for them to settle. I wonder if they've done another study, getting their hands out after this one, for another study to see if the language in which you speak has an effect, Because they can make a fortune there too. Surely they could, yeah. There you go. But it's such rubbish, honestly is, It's such awful rubbish. And here they go. Remember I mentioned that when they went wear 2 masks or 2-ply masks? If ventilation is improved so the air is renewed 5 times an hour rather than 3 times, this risk can be cut to under 2%. A similar drop can be gained if everyone wears 3-ply face masks. Well, definitely if you stop breathing, I think that would stop the problem, right? Okay. What geniuses these guys are, Isn't that amazing, Madness, isn't it? Just total madness. And there's some articles that are just so rubbish you don't want to read at all, honestly. But you've never seen such panic generated by government. This is a war of terror upon the people. And how they try to get you into guilt tripping. The COVID vaccine, the Home Secretary in Britain says jumping queue for vaccine is morally reprehensible and hence it fines, he says. Then members of Parliament say there are loopholes in the NHS booking system because of a booking system of who should get priority, right? Yeah. And again, the guilt tripping. So it says here, her comments come as top medics warn that people using software loopholes to get vaccinated earlier at risk of causing the death. So people are more vulnerable than them. Well, you've already seen what's happening to a lot of the elderly after getting it. Oh, well, they're dying anyway. Why are you giving that to people? Something that can have a bad reaction. Yeah? Giving to people who are on the brink of dying. Why are you doing that? When their immune system's wrecked anyway, that's what happens as you get older. Your immune system starts dying off. Right? Just not as efficient as it used to be. I think that something's happened to us too with their diets and probably the pesticides and the food and all the rest of it. We're not the people that used to exist. We're much weaker. I have no doubt about that at all. More than half the Church of England's parishes closed for Sunday services amid the COVID crisis. So more than half of its 14,000 parishes have closed for the communal Sunday worship. And some of the clergy are shielding, that says, and all parishes are making their own decisions, with a number of churches deciding it's not safe enough to admit worshippers. Many parishes have moved their worship online, it says here. Awaken the spike of coronavirus cases. Cases are, the more testing you do, you'll never run out of cases, you understand. Even if COVID-19 was to just suddenly disappear tomorrow, you'll still be able to find cases with the tests. Cases. Half the population feel lonelier now than ever before in their life, says study. And the nation hasn't seen family for over 3 months either, which is just one factor contributing to the sad statistics that 55% of us are lonelier now than we've ever been in our lives. I guess they get paid money to do these articles too, these studies on loneliness. What do you expect when they shut down the economy, or they're staying in their homes, or else? Huh? What would happen when you shut them all in their homes and they can't get out, or they get harassed or fined? What would that cause? I wonder how much the study cost them. Yeah. I'd have done it for, a few pennies, I think, really. See, they're all doing all the studies on it. 45% of Brits feel anxious about elderly relatives and neighbours who can't use technology to stay in touch with loved ones. But it says that despite that the age group perhaps is most acquainted with technology is the one that feels the loneliest, millennials feel lonelier than any other generation. You understand that if herd immunity was allowed to, Lightfoot on as normal, herd immunity would sweep through the population so quickly, and you'd have your natural immunity to it. A lot safer too. Never mind the fact that you still survive, and go on into the future, because you won't go into much of a future with this perpetual lockdown and the wrecking of it. The purpose, the mandated war type wrecking of the economy for sustainability. Oh, sorry, the Great Reset. Let's call it what they call it, the Great Reset. Another article too, vaccinated people must stick to lockdown rules as they may spread the coronavirus, says Jonathan Van Dam. It's not like Van Damme, it is Van Damme. But it says, getting your COVID-19 vaccination doesn't mean you can liberate yourself from lockdown or other restrictions. This is from Sky News. And it's a warning from England's Deputy Chief Medical Officer, Professor Jonathan Van Dam, who says the millions of people who have received their jab must still obey social distancing rules. Those who refuse risk prolonging the pandemic and its associated restrictions, he said, adding they could also be putting at risk those who are vulnerable, but further down the priority list. Professor Van Dam said that while a vaccination can prevent serious illness, understand this will be like, it doesn't say will, it says can. It's just like saying maybe. It's not yet known if it prevents transmission of the virus, so you could spread it. And they're worried now that folk who've had the vaccination are going to spread the virus. So anyway, he wrote in the Sunday Telegraph, even after you have both doses of the vaccine, you may still give COVID to someone else, and the chains of transmission will then continue. If you change your behaviour, you could still be spreading the virus, keeping the cases of number of cases high, and putting all you do is stop doing the testing. The number of cases will plummet. Then use clinical diagnosis like observation, history, temperature, signs and symptoms, all the stuff they should be doing anyway to get proper diagnosis. Number of people with severe allergic reactions exceeded normal levels after a California clinic vaccinated local residents with a batch of Moderna's COVID-19 vaccine, reported the Los Angeles Times Monday. And California health officials have asked the state's medical service to suspend vaccination from this particular batch of vaccines. That's a big blow to them, because they'll get round it. Of course, they'll say, well, we're going to order it from a different batch or something, because they're not going to stop, no matter what happens. Another article about the same one, they urges a halt to using a batch of Moderna doses after fewer than 10 people were treated for possible severe allergic reactions, They all received the vaccine at the same community site. And they need medical attention over a 24-hour period. Pan says no other similar clusters were found. Pan didn't specify the number of cases involved or where they occurred. Well, this is how they give you information. They just don't give you all. And on it goes, A record 250,000 small firms on the brink of closure. This is industrial body. This is from Sky News again, Business Reporter. It says business confidence is its weakest since the financial crisis of 2008. No kidding. Well, that's what happens when you can't have any businesses at all. actually working. So a record 250,000 small firms are set to close this year under combined pressure from our coronavirus pandemic and Brexit. That's in Britain. They're blaming Brexit for it, which is a bit nonsensical. It says the Federation of Small Businesses said its survey revealed a huge cost ahead for the employment without additional support from Treasury to help mitigate the challenges faced by members. So they said the lowest, the second lowest level of confidence business confidence since the financial crisis at a time when firms are grappling renewed COVID-19 lockdowns and so on. And they go through a lot of the companies, different kinds of companies that are going down quicker than others and so on. Other one too is, doctors in Norway have been told to conduct more thorough evaluations of very frail elderly patients in line to receive the Pfizer BioNTech, they call it, vaccine against COVID-19. Following deaths of 23 patients, it went up actually to about 33 the other day there. I like how they always get these same numbers in the papers, 33. You've seen that a lot these days. Yeah. So anyway, it says the agency investigated 13 of the deaths so far and concluded that common adverse reactions of the mRNA vaccines such as fever, nausea and diarrhea may have contributed to fatal outcomes in some of the frail patients. Yeah. There's a possibility these common adverse reactions, collapsing your blood pressure plummets with the shock of it all, of that allergic reaction. It's just common adverse reactions that are not dangerous in fitter, younger patients. Well, we're talking about the elderly here, So we bring in fitter, younger patients in. And not unusual with vaccines. It may aggravate underlying disease in the elderly, Madsen said. That's the one that's in charge of Norway's health. We're not alarmed or worried about this. And I'm sure you aren't, because it's not you who's dying. Because these are very rare occurrences, and they occurred in very frail patients with very serious disease, he emphasised. We're now asking for doctors to continue with the vaccination, but to carry extra evaluation of very sick people whose underlying condition might be aggravated by it. Oh, now they're thinking of that, I tell you. Now, Bloomberg has an article about this too, doing a bit of damage control, I guess. But like all new drugs, the vaccines that have been authorised to protect against COVID-19 come with some safety concerns and side effects. And they mentioned that the two Western shots deployed, one from Pfizer Inc. and BioNTech SC, and another from Moderna Inc., have experienced fever, headaches and pain at the site of injection. The side effects generally disappear quickly. More worrisome, a small number of vaccine recipients have had serious but treatable allergic reactions called anaphylaxis. Norway reported deaths amongst elderly people with serious underlying health conditions following administration of the Pfizer-BioNTech shot, but a review by the World Health Organization found no evidence of a connection to the vaccine. Do you see how much they really care about you with that blithe comeback, Oh, a review by the WHO found no evidence of a connection to the vaccine. No. It says, so it goes on to say, to rationalise the deaths, 33 were reported in mid-January among some 42,000 people given the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine in Norway, where authorities have prioritised the immunisation of nursing homes and residents. So those who died were all in the 75 plus years bracket, and include terminally ill patients anticipated to have only weeks or months to live. Why would you be giving these folk who have no immune system anyway, because they're on anti-carcinogenic drugs and radiation therapies, which destroys any immune system you got left? You know that, that's just fact, It says why would we be giving them these vaccines? They care about them. I mean, this is the best medical advice, supposedly the specialists. Are you really believing this? So after a review, the WHO Global Advisory Committee on Vaccine Safety said that the fatalities are in line with the expected all-cause mortality rates and causes of death in the subpopulation of frail elderly individuals. The committee concluded the risk-benefit balance of the vaccine remains favourable in the elderly. There you go. So it's a benefit, it's a risk-benefit, and it's just sad if to die with it, So there you go. I wonder if they'll put them all down as COVID deaths as well. Yeah. It says in Germany there have been more than 800,000 people have received their first 2 doses of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. And listen to this. The little bits that come out. The Paul Ehrlich Institute has investigated at least 7 cases of elderly people dying shortly after vaccination. In its report, it said the deaths were probably due to the patient's underlying diseases, including carcinomas, kidney deficiencies, and Alzheimer's, not inoculation. The Paul Ehrlich Institute, you know, the guy who literally came up with the population bomb and had the big following, and all the politicians courted him for his advice, and too many people, and oh my goodness, eugenics a whole lot. Paul Ehrlich Institute is investigating on behalf of the drug companies. Wow, there you go. There you go, folks. His wife, by the way, was on the board of the Club of Rome. Yeah. Small world, isn't it? Doesn't take many folk to control the planet, you know. So there you go. So it's just the old folk dying. It's just old folk dying. That's the comeback on. The same ones that tell you, don't you care about old people? Why are you putting out information that might not want the vaccinations? Don't you care about the old folk? You might be causing their deaths by speaking out. And here they are when this happens. Well, they're on the verge of death anyway. You know, they're dying of this, that, and the other things. And from the same, again, doublespeak, from the same sources. And Fauci, again, says the vaccine may become mandatory. Imagine that, And some institutions don't really require employees to be vaccinated, adding that it's quite possible the vaccine will be required for overseas travel. Of course it will be. They do want a passport, but it won't be just for external travel. They want it for internal travel too. It's, you can see how they, again, the noble lie to the poor little innocent sheep there. And oh, well, it's just for so-and-so, just for that. And then move the goalpost. Oh, they've added that into it now too. That's how everything works and with the regulatory laws, which aren't really laws at all. And you're definitely going to see the long-term effects eventually down the road, because this is an experimental DNA-altering vaccine here. And again, oil industry reels as Biden targets of fossil fuels in first days. Again, don't forget that too. They really care about the elderly, as they take away your choices and abilities to get different kind of fuels, you know. And I'll put up the link too to Lord Sumption that I mentioned before, tells the stage 4 cancer patients that her life is less valuable. The former justice remark made to the woman with bowel cancer during TV debate on COVID lockdowns. So you got some criticism for telling the woman with stage 4 cancer her life was less valuable. Yeah. Again, naturally, it was on the BBC One show, The Big Questions on Sunday, to discuss question of whether lockdown was punishing too many for the greater good. I use that term, the greater good, right? Lord Sumption, one of the most prominent anti-lockdown campaigners, said he didn't accept that all lives are of equal value. Yeah. He served on the Supreme Court till 2018. Said he believed his children and grandchildren's lives were worth more because they got a lot more ahead of it. Bad phrasing too. He said he believed his children and grandchildren's lives were worth more. If you want to be nitpicking, as they say. Yeah. Responding to Sumption's remarks, Deborah James, who has stage 4 metastatic bowel cancer and hosts the BBC's You, Me and the Big C podcast, said, with all due respect, I'm the person who you say their life is not valuable. And then he interrupted by saying, I didn't say it was not valuable, I said it was less valuable. But again, these characters are the same kind of characters that are into bioethics and who should get treatment, who shouldn't get treatment, and who's worth saving, who's not worth saving. Everything that people were wary of when they set up the health services is initially the health services were to treat everybody equally, yada, yada, yada. Kind of like Switzerland does, you know. But eventually the real agendas creep into them and who to treat, who not to treat, yada, yada. Because you're just a burden on society. Even though you pumped all this money in society through your taxes, you know you're a burden, you know. And the article here, which is quite interesting, to do with the World Wildlife Fund, which Prince Philip was up there with the Sierra Club, etc. And they're all connected. For sustainability, all these different, nature conservatory groups are into acquiring the best farmland across Africa and different places, so you can't farm it and grow food and stuff. And Prince Philip certainly made no bones about it in his speeches about too many people or too many you. So anyway, this article here is the WWF forces industries to use expensive certification schemes controlled by the WWF itself to prove sustainability. In 2014, the World Wildlife Fund's Senior Vice President of Markets and Food, Jason Clay, wrote, "We can't touch 7 billion people directly, or even 1.5 billion producers. But we can touch the companies that reach them." So the WFF decide not to spend its time or money on education strategies or working in partnership with industries and producers, but on assuming control of their futures. Remember, I mentioned that the futures are planned. It did by implementing its market transformation strategy, targeting the companies producers sell to, realizing that they could wield great influence by controlling the supply chains of local government legislation. The biggest benefit in taking the approach was the WWF could leverage the incredible power companies like McDonald's and Unilever, the largest manufacturers of ice cream, have over consumers. By going after corporate targets and forcing them to transform their operations, the WWF has been getting big business and many financial institutions to indirectly suggest to consumers that particular industries aren't following sustainable environmental or animal care practices, when at least in the case of agriculture, they are. And it goes into to say coffee, palm oil, aquaculture and the forest industry have all been manipulated by market transformation and stewardship schemes, resulting in each having to abide by additional sustainability standards and third-party certification at significant cost to individual producers. It also it's controlling the whole planet's food supply. I hope you're starting to get the point here of how they do it. It's been clear for a while that beef and cane are also in the sights of the WWF, with both appearing on the list of 15 commodities WWF states have the biggest impact on areas of global conservation. And as you already have seen from last week's articles, that Bill Gates is now the biggest owner and purchaser of farmland, or of land anyway, in the US, I think. And I'm sure you have it all over the world as well. So we've touched on food production going into eventually rationing, and probably starvation will come out across the world eventually, but continued lockdowns for years. And taking over the food supply, what's left of the food supply. They already did that a long time ago with the big cartel industries. And they have massive monopolies, there's no doubt about it, on the food supply side of it, and water. I give the talks on everything you need to live on will be owned by them. Now you've got fuel as well. So you've got food and fuel. And so, they're going after everything you need to survive. Literally survive physically. And it's all done by big think tanks. On behalf of these big foundations that are part of the big deep state. Now, some places are even giving away free cannabis for the shots, or with the shot, And again, this article too has got a tongue-in-cheek thing, because the owner of the greenhouse, this is the name of the company, I guess, with the cannabis, he said, "We support the safe and responsible use of cannabis and hope this is the beginning of the end of this insidious pandemic." But of course, it's as much publicity for him and his company as it's to do with the pandemic. And I guess a lot of folk will go for that kind of thing too. Or, as I say, like in Britain, even getting tested if you get a positive test. Again, it's one of these things that you might win. You might win. It's like Tim Hortons in Canada. They sometimes have these coffee specials on, or winning specials, where you'll win a bicycle or something. And they give you a list of things you could win, and you roll up the rim to win, they call it. So you have to peel up at the top, and it tells you if it's, bad luck, try again. That's generally what you get. So same thing is the possible you might win something. So with the one in Britain, with the £500 one, well, you might win if you test positive. So I guess you can keep going back and back and back, hoping you get a positive test. Eventually you will with those tests. You get one regardless. But £500. A lot of scam artists there too, on the go. I mean, you can see some of the really good scam artists that find people who've tested positive already and try to get them the same day to get another test using their name. You get quite wealthy that way, I suppose. And why not all the top corporations with their hands out for millions and billions of dollars? And this is plunder time. It's what Rothschild said when he'd been truthful, asking when the best time to make money is. In investments or whatever, he said it's when the blood is running in the streets, meaning when you've got massive crisis, that's when the best time to make the biggest profits, because everybody's petrified and terrified and hysterical in a sense. You can demand whatever you want. So you've got all these characters out there with all their different apps they're coming out with and little gadgets to test, even better testing gadgets, all got their hands out and getting millions of dollars put into it to try out a new type of test or something like that. It ends up going nowhere, but you don't have to guarantee you get anything made. You'll try. Well, I'll try and make this thing. Give them a few $1 million and I'll see what I can do. So yeah, they're giving pot out and so on, and we'll see how well that goes. Also, Ontario, Canada, the top doctor, I like how I say it to you, a top doctor. What makes them any more top than anybody else as a doctor? They're political appointees. And it says daily COVID-19 cases will have to fall to around 1,000 to lift the lockdown. Now that's what they're finding with these swab tests, right? The cases. The more swab tests you put, the more they're going to keep climbing. I don't care if you tried it before COVID came along, they still test positive. They're so faulty for what they're using them for here. But anyway, it says Dr. David Williams, Chief Medical Officer of Health, looks on during the daily COVID-19 press briefing, Queen's Park, blah, blah, blah. So he said that the number of new COVID cases reported daily should be around or below 1,000 before the lockdown orders can be lifted. So obviously all they have to do is keep churning out even more tests to keep the lockdown. Right? So the province's Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. David Williams, said that officials would have to be able to guarantee hospital capacity could be protected before changing the public health measures in Ontario. Another thing too, for folk who don't, I read the article about how they're managing inside the hospitals, and you've already had folk fined and arrested in different countries, in Britain too, for going into hospitals and showing it pretty empty. But I was reading an article there too, that even in the ICU, in places where they're treating COVID cases, that have got actual illnesses, that it would seem that they're almost full, because they've got to keep them so many meters apart, the beds and everything, eh? And now that they're trying to push it up to 3 meters apart, then that's fewer beds as they keep. So you get fewer patients in the same ward, you see, for COVID. So they can say that they're full. It's interesting how they finagle things. It's like FDR said, there are lies, damn lies, and then there are statistics. And of course, you can hire folk who are specialists in creating statistics and warping them to suit whoever you want the findings to be. And that's a fact, folks. So anyway, it says, the province said that it becomes harder to support non-COVID-19 needs when the number of ICU patients with the novel coronavirus exceeds 150. Now, is that folk are in for different reasons and also test positive? Or, you see, this is how they muddied the waters deliberately. Yeah. It says it becomes impossible to handle once it exceeds 350 people. It says, as of Monday, there are currently 1,571 patients in hospital with COVID-19. Now, where? Is that the whole of Ontario? Where is it? It says, of those, at least 394 patients are being treated in the ICU, and 300 for your breathing with the assistance of a ventilator. Now, is it because it's winter and this is when you get all the other viruses too? See, they haven't been specific here as usual. And how many hospitals are those patients scattered around in? And also, what's your annual intake at this time of year when you've got flu, colds, and all kinds of bronchial pneumonias on the go, as you do every year, every winter? See, it's too easy to fudge everything by omission, you see. That's why they do it too. Don't give them the rest of the story. And again, so Doug Ford issued a lockdown province-wide at December 26th. They shuttered all non-essential businesses and prohibited in-person dining at bars and restaurants. And obviously, if your plan is to churn out about 10,000 tests a day, you're going to fulfill your quota of too many cases, as you call it. It doesn't tell you if you've got the thing, had the thing, or even if that's what's testing positive for. It could be the other virus or particles thereof, etc. To do with the climate agreement, the Conference of Parties, again, they're going to meet again. Going to meet in Glasgow, of all places. It says, and guess who's going to be? John Kerry. John Kerry. Signalled on his first day that the Glasgow Climate Change Conference will be the most important event of the year. Well, no kidding, because that's going to ram home the whole sustainability agenda in collusion with the WEF and with the COVID exercise. So the US president has signalled that all roads lead to Glasgow this year. And that's his climate envoy is John Kerry. The same old faces and same names, Familiar names and familiar places and familiar faces and names. It's a song, isn't it? Keep cropping up over and over. So it's a climate change summit to be held in Scotland, it says. And Kerry has tweeted, and I love how they tweet now, Friends, today we get back to work. As I head back into government, I'll now be tweeting from Climate Envoy. Hope you'll follow me and join me on the road to Glasgow. Yep, there you go. So they've got an ambitious climate agenda, it says. So you're going to see sustainability as you cut back this and cut back that. And not just cut back all your fuel and oil and so on, but also cut back all carbon-based products, basically. That's what they claim. But you're carbon-based life form, by the way. That's what you are. Ontario grant offers small businesses hard hit by the lockdown up to $20,000, it says. It says there's no question eligible small businesses need urgent relief to help them navigate the challenge, yada, yada, yada. Barrie Chamber of Commerce President, that's Barrie, Ontario, Todd Tuckey, said most businesses should qualify for the grant. You look at your year of April 2020 versus the month of April 2019, and then compare the two, and if you show at least a 20% reduction, everybody will fudge that, folks, then you're eligible for the grant, to say. There you go. $20,000. I remember reading this article a long time ago before the COVID got a grip, supposedly. And it's to do with collars. They were talking about putting collars on workers to keep them distancing apart. Again, even the company, I know where it is too. And I says, will they actually do this or not? Because, a dog collar on you, electronically, like the prisoners wear, right? French factory workers could be forced to wear social distancing devices that emit a loud noise, like a dog collar, if they stand too close to each other. It says a badge worn around the neck or waist would go off if 2-meter distance is not observed. Hygiene company says it could help contact tracing with his factory workers. But a French union condemned the dog collar as an attack on individual liberty. You better believe it. And it's a Swedish company, Essity, which makes hygiene products that has around 2,500 employees in France, is said to be planning to introduce the gadgets, which it claims could make the tracing easier, yada yada. But so it goes on about the union again. That was repeat the same stuff the same articles now. The company which makes the products including tissues, nappies, and hand sanitizers defended the proposal by saying it was meant to ensure employees' safety. Well, you could put balls and chains on your feet for employees, then you couldn't walk, beyond 6, feet or whatever. They said it won't be used to pinpoint people's location. Who's kidding who, eh? And it would be inactive in the toilets and the canteen. Yeah, sure. You'd hope folk learn as you go through life, they can't trust any of these characters that are above you there. None of them. None. That's how they see you. And again, some companies got its hand out for big bucks. You say, oh, yeah. Again, as I say, Ontario is way ahead. Well, Canada's way ahead of every other country for euthanasia. And for getting the idea across, written by bioethics counsellors and so on. Is it maybe time for you to die and think about it? And it says, Ontario patients to be ranked for life-saving care should ICUs become full documents show. And it's almost a carbon copy of what they turned out last year, you see, as you get the message across, you see. So patients with the greatest chance of survival beyond 12 months should be prioritised for critical care in the event that overwhelmed Ontario hospitals need to begin rationing life-saving treatments, the provincial government said in a document. The province's triage protocol guidance states that patients should be assessed and placed in a colour-coded framework based on their risk of short-term mortality. So you're all getting colour-coded before you get in the hospital now, by the way. They know everything about you, if you have any medical history at all. And it says, is based on the risk of short-term mortality, which is defined as survival beyond 12 months after the onset of critical illness. In the context of a major surge in demand for critical care resources, I wonder what they're actually giving them in the hospitals for treatment apart from ventilators. Are they actually giving them antivirals or whatever? What are they doing, eh? So it says that where demand actually exceeds the number who can be safely managed with available resources, including ventilator supplies and trained staff, it's inevitable that some who may have otherwise benefited from critical care will not receive it, and as a result, some will die who would otherwise have lived. Well, the folk who can't get in for cancer treatments and stuff like that, and every other kind of treatment, normal treatments, are going to get worse, and they know that too. So from the authorities that care, right? They care about the elderly, but they just don't bother right now about the cancer patients and other folk who can't get treatments. And early treatments is very important in cancers when they're first discovered, before they can really spread out there. So there you go, folks. There's nothing to guess about, but I'll guarantee none of the wealthy elite or the politicians that are all on the payroll and little special privileges, none of them are going to suffer and be on a colour-coded chart, believe you me. It says all patients being considered for critical care treatment must be assessed by 2 physicians, and if a consensus about the patient's mortality risk is not reached, the more optimistic prognosis will be selected. If demand for critical care continues to exceed available resources at level 3, there may be little clinical evidence to guide triage decisions on the basis of predicted short-term mortality. As a result, triage decisions must appeal to procedural fairness. There you go. ICU physicians should also reassess patients admitted to ICU at regular intervals and consider withdrawal of life support through a shared decision-making process with SDM, which is substitute decision makers, or who they'll be, if a patient does not appear to be improving despite receiving critical care. The document continues. This is getting you used to the idea of euthanasia, folks, because euthanasia can be given immediately through a medication or simply withdrawing treatment, okay? And only then can they make sure that these resources are available for other people, you see. And it says, we're at the dangerous point, epidemiologist Dr. Adelstein Brown, co-chair of the province's COVID-19 science table, said. Now, they have these science tables where they all sit and debate with bioethics. that this supposed new morality, we've got a diploma in morality. You don't have that, you see. And so we decide what's morals. And you're expendable if you're just color-coded on this particular color chart here. And you're not really essential, you see. A politician could be really essential, and they'd have to pump a lot of money into them if they're a good yes man or woman, That's how it works. I tell you. Is to get you ready for much, similar things down the road, which is basically your own need for treatment at some time, regardless of COVID. This is going to be permanent, you see, this devaluating, getting you to accept the devalued life that you have. Getting you to accept it is very important. Well, okay, And once again, until you're developing last resort guidelines on which patients to prioritise if hospitals are overwhelmed by critical COVID-19 cases. And there's another article about the same thing. Now remember when 9/11 happened, immediately the media, again with government tax money, big money, they threw the money around for anti-terrorism, domestic terrorism, right? Came out with all these sudden big TV dramas, one in the States with the president and the different guys going after different terrorists and shooting them on the knees and stuff, and the different actors involved. It's got more and more graphic. Canada came out with something called The Border, I think it was The Border. Big money, rotten scripts, naturally. And they actually had a flight of, F-16s that were flying down to one of the bridges that connects us with the States. All fiction, strafing the bridge, by the way, all incredible fiction to dramatise and this completely fictionalised terrorism, you see. As I've told you, everything you get for entertainment today is pure propaganda. I don't care what it's about. It's indoctrinating you in something or another, guaranteed. Well, here's... I fell off my chair when I said this one. Kenneth Branagh is to play Boris Johnson in new TV drama charting the Prime Minister's handling of the pandemic. So now we get a fictitious account of Boris Johnson. And no doubt he'll be crying over the deaths and, oh my God, have I done enough? Have I done enough, And someone will come in and comb his hair for him and lacquer it again to make sure it's all sticking out like a coronavirus head. Because, he literally gets all that unkept hair. That's literally styled from like that, So, yeah, Branagh's going to play Boris Johnson, I don't want to read any more of this, I'll be sick, I think it's called This Scepter Dial. Who dreamt this rubbish up? This Scepter Dial, A Sky original drama will tell the story of some of the most devastating events to ever hit the country. And of a Prime Minister leading through unprecedented times. When you read the article here, it's like a script from World War II propaganda movie. It really is. You see, these are formulas which they use in wartime. And it says in this article here, I'll just read a little bit. I can't help it because it's so funny. It says that the drama will trace the impact on Britain from this once-in-a-generation crisis. The crisis has all come from the lockdowns, folks, and the destruction of the economy. Anyway, it says, and the response of scientists, nurses, and doctors as they work tirelessly to try and contain the virus. It's based on first-hand testimony of people from all walks of life. From number 10, Downing Street, the Department of Health, the Scientific Advisory Group for Emergencies. That's the SAGE group, remember, that actually funded a subgroup of behaviourists and psychologists and nudgers, as they call it, to actually exaggerate their stories on COVID to create anxiety in the public to get them to comply, the SAGE group. So they're in it here too, and I'm sure they'll be tireless experts, not portrayed as decent people, not the deceivers they are. Let's deliberately increase the anxiety level, they said, right, in the public. Anyway, so here's the fictitious version of it all. It says, Prime Minister Boris Johnson outlines new lockdown for England in a televised address to the nation from 10 Downing Street, London, setting out new emergency measures to control the spread of the coronavirus. And it says the 5-part series was co-written and directed by Michael Winterbottom. Oh, that guy better have his fuel quotas in for as they're cutting back. Whose previous hits include Welcome to Sarajevo, A Mighty Heart, 24-Hour Party People, and The Road to Guantanamo. There you go. He said the first wave of COVID-19 pandemic series, right, will be remembered forever. A time when the country came together to battle an invisible enemy. A time when people were more aware than ever of the importance of community. Doesn't that start stirring your heart? You're ready to put a uniform in and march wherever they tell you. Yeah. Aren't you? And you're all set for it, you know. Isn't that something? Remember that when they look for a reason to unite the people into sustainability, something they would have to fight for. The Club of Rome was given the task, they said, you know, to find something that would unite the people. They thought about all kinds of things and scary things that would unite them all. They discussed wars and everything. The only time that people come together. And so they came up with the idea that plagues, famine, pestilence, that kind of stuff, you know, that would fit the bill. Remember that? Remember that? May remember forever a time when the country came together to battle an invisible enemy, a time when people were more aware than ever of the importance of the community. Thank God for fiction and propaganda. Now, with all this stuff that's been happening too, there's so much performance going on. It's really performance, isn't it? To do with everything on television is a show. I don't care the news show. Everything's a show, folks. That's what it is. Hope you realise that. It's never been so blatant as it is today. The same media and the ones that used to run newspapers, the same name as it's all internet now. They had to get subsidies from the government for years because no one was reading their nonsense. It was such rubbish. But they're back in full force with the war on terror, you know, and getting heavily subsidised again to put out all the fear in a common narrative. You see, the whole idea of wartime is to get all the opinions decided by experts that the people must parrot. Anything, I don't care how divergent from the parroting is hammered by the authorities. That's what you're seeing now, of course. There's no freedom of speech or freedom of thought or even speculation. Even if you said this is speculation, doesn't matter. It's forbidden. You're living under an authoritarian system now. And you don't have to go far to look at for all the signs and symptoms of it. So you've got to understand there's so much going on. And the same thing with as I say, your whole life you've been living in an illusion because you're trained to believe, to be naive and to believe it's all real and nice, etc. through the propaganda they've fed you again with all the fictitious stories or fiction movies they've given you on politicians and how there's some decent ones there that you know in that other world which doesn't exist, the one that they tell you to believe in. So folk can't believe it today when the same authorities are all parroting the same stuff that doesn't make sense to you by your own observations. You know. That's how easy it is to control the people. They all get on board with the same mantra. That's important. And that's why Rockefeller years ago talked about how to create basically what we would call today total spectrum dominance, including complete control of every topic that they wanted you to parrot and to give you your opinion, the opinion makers, you see. And then so they took over they created a whole bunch of newspapers and the rest of them would follow them. They knew they knew exactly through surveys that they'd done how many they would need to control the whole of the US. Newspapers and magazines, etc. And these ended up being the main ones that all the lesser ones would simply copy, you see. Quite easy, isn't it, really? The standardization of thought and opinion. A monopoly over thought and opinion. And they're absolutely ruthless when it comes to, as I say, not allowing anyone else to come in with a different opinion. But you've really been living through it your whole life long. And when you think of even the history of the US, when I was young, I thought, why is America off to Vietnam? There's all its treaties are signed with the South. The old story that Britain used to get into World War II is treaties and World War I. Well, we've signed these treaties with these countries. Some of them only in Britain were only signed a week before the war started because they wanted the wars, you see. But you find it now you find it with Vietnam, and it was rather evident to some countries that the real communism, if you want to call it communism, resided in the USA at the time, in the higher echelons of government and the State Department, you know. And you control the State Department, you control the whole system in America and abroad. So why on earth were they offered to this little country, Vietnam, to stop communism when it was taken over back home the whole time? When Marxism was getting taught in universities quite openly, same in Britain, you know, and training a generation to be Marxists, which they were, a lot of them. Why would you be doing that and going off to fight at the same time, using all your resources over in Vienna? And nothing makes sense until you always realise that there's other reasons behind it. And part of the reason, too, was to devalue Americans' ideas, impressions of themselves and their self-worth, which also has to do with power, obviously, as a people and a nation, militarily. And that was they get bogged down in a war which they couldn't win. And then, you know, given an inferiority complex when it comes to the ultimate managers of war, they were laughed at by the other Cold War countries like China and Russia at the time, Soviet Russia, and the Soviet bloc countries, as the greatest nation with the greatest armament power and all the rest of it, was getting defeated by the Viet Cong. But in reality, too, they weren't allowed to win it anyway, in many different ways. And they shouldn't have been there in the first place. Obviously, foreign entanglements, that's what Washington said. And others said it too, that the nation will do well if we keep out of foreign entanglements. We meant treaties, you see, because it draws you into wars. And that's what makes no sense at all when Kissinger and the other guys, as I mentioned earlier, about Afghanistan, they helped to set up the whole system for the Soviet Union to bring troops, masses of troops into and get bogged down in Afghanistan. And they set up the rebellion to get the troops in. And then they helped the Afghanis, many different tribesmen inside, different types of tribesmen, armed them and trained them, and bogged Russia down for such a long, long time until Russia was exhausted. The people at home were so sick of it, losing troops, losing equipment, losing resources and the whole thing, and kept demanding to get out of it, and it would dragged on for years until it exhausted them. And then, as I said, the troops were coming back home with masses of drugs from Afghanistan, which got into society in some of the big cities in Russia, until it's a lot their clinics and their mental institutions were full of people withdrawing from all kinds of heavy-duty drugs. So why would the US, once that was done, didn't wait too long once Russia was out and 9/11 comes, and then here they are attacked themselves, and they're still bogged down there. See, when things don't make sense, it means that what they're telling you is for completely different reasons. That they're here, there, or anywhere else. It's nothing to do with the simplicity of what they tell you, because simplicity means that it's obviously bogus. You wouldn't do the same mistake that you set up Russia to fall into. You wouldn't do it yourself, obviously. So there's other reasons for it all. And again, you can go even into the different writings of some of the politicians. Jean Kirkpatrick was awfully avant-garde in the whole push for socialism across the world. And yet Ronald Reagan brought her into his cabinet. And he set her up there because he set her up to plan out the strategies that she'd advocated. She says, rather than just go into countries one after another and change them and alter them or whatever through warfare, why not we set up permanent bases across the world for it? And he did. That's what the US has done ever since. permanent basis, you see. So whatever happens for the countries that have invaded, we're all planned long in advance. I'm sure there's a whole waiting list of countries still to go. We know there are actually who are still in the peanut groups, a bunch of ones that general mentioned on Democracy Now! He says, well, we didn't understand why we're going here, there, and everywhere after 9/11. There's a whole bunch of, and the guy says there's more countries on the list too. So, yeah, everything just falls into line. It's all pre-planned, obviously. They admit it is, and they follow plans that they've written years ago. Absolutely years ago. So whenever you see anything happening on any kind of lines, look at the COVID exercise. You had countless exercises before it, like tabletop ones, with the real participants, so-called specialists involved, Johns Hopkins and the Bill Gates, Melinda Gates Foundation, groups all working together, and plans, and World Health Organization authorities and stuff. And even in 2010, the Rockefellers too were involved with those last two groups for the tabletop exercises in lockstep. You have all that happening for something that they obviously knew was going to happen, obviously. And when they couldn't get it all rammed through climate change control and post-consumerist laws to get rammed through to save us all from consuming, then bingo, here you get this taking over a COVID exercise. And now they're going to combine the two again for sustainability. Sustainability means they've got numbers which they say would be the ideal population to sustain the planet and to exist on the planet. And believe you me, if that's the case, you're looking at mass genocide to make that happen. How else are they who could they possibly do it? They're rather impatient. They don't want to see if the next generation they're not going to breed at all or volunteer for sterility. And I'm not making this up. They've had lots of questionnaires put out over the years about this. Would you volunteer too? Blah, 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 So they do it the hard way, which is they'll say is tough love, tough love type of technique, and you're going to get it whether you like it or not, and that's it. And that way they go. You're living through it, folks. You're all living through it. And most folk don't recognize it. cuttingthroughmatrix.com. Remember, send a few bucks my way, because at the end of the talk, most folks forget. I'm not there yet, mind you, at the end, but just to remind you, cuttingthroughmatrix.com, and you'll see how to send a few bucks my way and help me just keep going, because believe you me, you have no idea. You have no idea. I've mentioned unconventional warfare. I've mentioned the Department of Defense, their own manuals about it, how they've trained folk and how they instruct them to go into countries. They can be there for 10, 15 years. Bloggers and everything. That's what they do. And they become the leader bloggers, you see, and they get well financed eventually, but they take off gradually, and then they start bending and getting one group ready to fight another because they're taught to hate them. They actually do teach them to hate other groups so you can divide and conquer, and you've witnessed it in America all through the last year to the present. Same thing, same people behind it, no doubt about military. And they organize coups, overthrows of existing people in order to put their own characters and their own puppets in. Formula, complete formula, it's made, including setting up a lot of people to go. Decent people, thousands of disenchanted people who've been tossed to the side for years, actually. A lot weren't class people too. To air their grievances and use them to demonize the whole lot of them by putting a few trained radicals in the front for this big photo op that for the ones that actually went into the building on January the 6th. And a lot of fools followed it because they thought it was all real. But believe you me, if you do some kind of rebellion, you would obviously be well trained in advance to do it, huh? Or a revolution. You just don't have spontaneous, we're not happy type things. No, that was all a photo op to demonize what was to come. As we all know this. And unfortunately, folk will forget who conned them into going, who actually got cash to help promote it. And you'll see them all backtracking now. Oh no, we had nothing to do with that. And you have no idea how many bloggers emerged, have you, over the last 3 or 4 years in preparation. All the time they put Trump in, all these bloggers suddenly appear, well-funded and big. You get top billing at all the different outlets of YouTube and elsewhere. And it's top billing, And you think it's all real. Then they add the Q thing in with it. Oh, can you believe that? And folk fell for that. To me, it was a joke from the beginning, that, But folk were actually believing in it. It reminded me at the time of the Indian dance, that they had the spirit dance. They had it. A lot of the American Indians that had been pushed further south in the US and put on reservations, and they lost their land and everything. A lot of them were slaughtered, as well known. But they came up with the spirit dance, the ghost dance, they called it. And they put up something like a maypole, and they would have these thongs hanging down from the maypole with hooks on them, and they literally put these hooks through their bodies. And they'd run round this pole, and occasionally their feet would touch the ground, and they would push them, give it another push, and keep them round it until they were into a kind of stupor, exhausted and anemic, because we're losing blood, stupor, in order to get visions. Now, this is the desperation of a culture that's seen its whole reason for being annihilated. This happened in other cultures in the past across the world, and Africa, and from Africans to Africans too. This is a thing that happens. And so these guys, these kind of shaman type guys would try to, the idea was that they would not just show their bravery by doing this, but if you could get into that stuporose in-between state, between the spirit world, the ghost world, and your own, you could communicate to the ghosts of previous generations of your own people to come back and fight for you to drive the white man out, you see. The invaders, and eventually I think the military stepped in to stop it because it was so bad, and wherever they had it, the natives would get really they would start doing crazy things and causing trouble, and they get arrested, etc. for it. It was a last resort. It's also, you actually saw that, I think, interesting enough, and when was it the last one in the series of Lord of the Rings, or the last bit of the main movie, or from the book, where they go into the big cavern of lost souls, and they recruit them all on their side. That's all from what happened, actually. That story came from, actually, the legends of American Indians, the natives. I hate to call them Indians because they're not Indian. And they say, Columbus made a mistake. He thought he was going to India by a different route. Who's kidding who? Eh? Anyway, it reminds me too of the cargo cults, where during World War II, the US, across different Pacific islands, set up small air bases and things for refueling for long-term plans and agendas to do with the war. And the natives literally had never really met the white folk before, and they came out the sky in these big metal birds, you see. And suddenly they were delivering them food and Coca-Cola and all kinds of things, and trinkets. Some of them even made small businesses of using cans from canned meat and different things, and canned vegetables. They beat them into bracelets and started little small businesses. Much later, some of them even used Coca-Cola cans and stuff. Quite fascinating to see the old documentaries, if they're still out there. And so these people would stay, the bases might exist for the duration of the war, maybe a year later, and then they'd pull out suddenly, and they're gone. And the people literally were in shock. Because to them, these gods appeared out the sky in a big metal bird. And so what they ended up doing, desperation, because they got hooked on what they thought was a good life so quickly, with not having to scrape so much just for basic existence. And so they built wooden planes that could be seen from the air, and they hoped to attract a mate down from the sky to continue. It's quite fascinating how humans react to different things, and if no education, and that's your whole reality is almost like the Egyptian reality that was in between worlds of imagination, myth, superstition, etc. It's all combined together. So the real world, it would be interpreted through eyes of the mystic, in a sense. And so you can't blame the cargo cult people from doing what they did. But that's almost what it's like with what you see with the build-up to Donald Trump, and how people were led up the garden path for years. He tweeted a lot, but he didn't do much for those people, really. And we also had a great display of the intense hatred of the media, either playing their part, because I really think that this was a con from the beginning. It's my personal opinion, that you watched a big psychodrama. Everything's a big psychodrama, and everybody plays their part, because the whole idea is to eventually very quickly actually go into a post-democratic society, aided with the help of a pandemic, right? Which has to eliminate democratic principles under a crisis situation. That's no coincidence. It all culminates until folk are so fed up with politics that, so we might as well have a one-party system then, of experts. Well, that's what they want. Did everybody just play their part here, including the media? Because the venom spewed by the media, regardless of what people thought really of Trump, the venom has never been seen before against anyone like that before, really. And now the same media is portraying all the attendees, all the disaffected people who showed up and who didn't storm the Capitol as terrorists, which is likely the plan of the whole thing. And the only real people, gullible people, were the folk who attended it and didn't storm the building, because there were a lot of genuine grievances out there too. It wasn't just voting; it was to do with work and jobs and the cost of living, etc., etc. And being demonized all the time. Set up, interesting enough, there's a documentary, I might see and put it up, about, I think it's 10 Steps to Genocide, written by a woman who goes into the histories of genocide and how the people are always set up. The first thing they do is demonize an enemy. I've never seen such demonization of one group. They're targeted as I'm seeing today. You better remember all that, It's all scripted, obviously. Because all the media, once again, went across the world, went on into battle at the same time with the same smearing of all the people who'd had nothing to do with storming the building or demanding to get in. But the ones who did get in, but they're all known who they were, mainly. Some definitely followed. Some Trump supporters definitely followed. But the vast majority of them who got in were of different groups. A lot of government agents too in there. But everybody else they would have gone home if Trump hadn't said, hang around, go down to the building. They would have gone home at the end. That'd have been it. What a setup, eh? So it's a whole group of people and everything that they represent, and just by their ethnicity alone, although there's multiple ethnicities there, they're making out there's not, because there's one they definitely are smearing like never before. It's just astonishing. So yeah, you have to look at different techniques of genocide and how it's been done. And I speak from a country, as I say, where they did it in Scotland against the Highlander people. Planned genocide, But we're civilized now, aren't we? We don't do these things now. It doesn't happen now, really. What do you think Rwanda was all about? And the meddling of foreign powers in that too, and supplying of weaponry too to certain areas, and the withholding of the Canadian generals who hadn't many men underneath them for the United Nations, and telling him to stand back and just stand back and watch all happening. They didn't support him, didn't send the troops over, nothing, no. So you're left with the obvious conclusion that what happened there was planned to happen. But we're constantly living through agendas. And when you see the size of the population of the world, if you have even, say, 100 million people in high-level positions of managing us all, it's not difficult to make anything happen or to make anything perceived to be the way they tell you it is. Because it's all perception management, isn't it? And if they keep you running and being afraid and terrified all the time, most folks shut down, or they will not perceive what's in front of them and why things are happening. That's what terror is for, is to make you to comply and to be so afraid. They can change everything one step at a time, but very quickly, because you're stampeding, you see. You have no grounding in reality left in you. It's intentional. But the hype of the COVID thing, just the clips I've seen on the net that came from television, from mainstream news and so on, it's just over-the-top hype. The way that they're speaking is like actors or something, with using the voices they would use in a terror movie. Hype, 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 to exacerbate, comply is the message, really. If you want to live, comply, comply, and that's how it's done, isn't it? So everything's a big psychodrama. 9/11 was a psychodrama. You can argue forever what was behind it, but the fact is that what they saw on television was a psychodrama. Repetitive psychic driving. Here's the planes, buildings, boom, 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 over and over and over for days. Until I'm sure most folk were seeing it in their sleep. That was intentional psychic driving, they call it. MK Ultra type experience. Over and over, the same narrative, same narrative, same narrative, same narrative. And out of it comes part of a new world order, eh? Post-democratic, post-privacy. Now, the psychodrama didn't stop with what they showed you, with them going up into the building and staying within the ropes and all the rest of it for the tourists. But it continued with this overreaction, with the National Guard getting called in for Obama's inauguration. That's a continuation of psychodrama. And the history books were written in advance for that kind of thing. This is the Pentagon vows to vet National Guard for extremist ties ahead of inauguration. So this is thought police now, isn't it? You understand how you've been trained into a whole new system with thought police, and your life's value is for you or for them as they look at you. And are you important, non-important, essential, non-essential, yada, yada, yada. And here's the thought police coming in. And I really mean it. They've got the thought police out there anyway. They're working with the net to see all the different stuff you've been watching since you've been on the net. You're already pigeonholed and categorized. And so this one here is more than 21,000 National Guard troops assumed, about 21,000, come on here, positions across the heart of the nation's capital Monday as military and law enforcement officials took new steps to head off any insider threats among the massive force of part-time soldiers during President-elect Joe Biden's swearing in this week. Yep. So there you go. So I'll put that link up too. But it's a massive psychodrama. The folk who watch TV have all been indoctrinated and damaged in a sense. It's meant to kind of injure you psychically and imprint itself in your mind forever. Just like 9/11. Senate confirms Avril Haines as Director of National Intelligence, it says here, the Washington Post. So as a lawyer and former Deputy Director of the CIA, you feel better now, eh? As a Director of National Intelligence, 84-10 vote signalled early bipartisan support for President Biden's slate of national security nominees. These are things that are all planned in advance, all these kind of things. Even they've admitted that a lot of the different documents that Biden signed were all pre-planned before he got in. All printed up and the whole thing. Just sign here. Anyway, it says here, interestingly enough, it says that he's a CIA man. It says Haines had played a key role in Biden's transition and was an early favourite for the position. No kidding, eh? CIA. The Office of Director of National Intelligence was created in the wake of the September 11 attacks to help coordinate an intelligence apparatus that includes the CIA, the National Security Agency, and more than a dozen other organizations. So there's 14 organizations or more. It's similar to Britain because years ago they created a kind of a top of the pyramid scheme for all the different intelligence agencies in Britain. It created a lot of friction at first amongst them because they didn't really like each other, all competing recognizance, really, of their abilities to do what they're doing, and then they put this overseer in charge of them all, which again opened up to the spy world even more so than it had before, like foreign spying. Anyway, it says Haynes would be the first woman to serve in the position. She was also amongst the first cabinet nominees Biden announced, and signaled that he intends for her to serve as the principal leader in the public face off the spy agencies. So there you go. It's all right there. This one here too is an article. It's from the British Medical. It used to be called a magazine, but it was the Lancet. And it says the Trump year is drawing to a chaotic close. That's the perception you're supposed to all have. The events of January 6th, blah, blah, when a mob provoked by President Donald Trump minutes before stormed the U.S. Capitol building and forced Congress to flee to take shelter. Now, this is what's this medical journal doing, talking politics like this? This is the Lancet, for goodness sake. I mean, it really is something quite telling, this. Even the way they've worded this, so it's almost like he's the predetermined story that all have to parrot, right? When a mob provoked by the president, minutes before, it says, stormed the U.S. Capitol, a mob, and forced Congress to flee and take shelter, shocked the world. And it says the refusal to accept the results of a legitimate election and the use of social media to baselessly attack election officials and issue sow distrust in democracy. Of democracy. Here's the people who want a one-party system. Are all emblematic of what will be Trump's turbulent legacy. So that's one thing they achieved definitely through it all, is this new update on a private security, like intelligence system within America. Another one, a civilian one that is to go through all society and again embed itself in and keep its eyes and ears open and find out who's who. This is the Stasi. This is what's really come down as the Stasi system. No doubt about it, folks. And the KGB type. The KGB had its own form of the Stasi. I mean, the KGB itself was mainly for foreign intelligence. But it also had departments that dealt with internal problems. Now, dark money, it said in this article here, helped pave Joe Biden's path to the White House. Dark money. And it's Business Week this one comes from. So he benefited from a record-breaking amount of donations from anonymous donors to outside groups backing him, meaning the public will never have a full accounting of who helped him win the White House. It says his winning campaign was backed by $145 million in so-called dark money donations, a type of fundraising the Democrats have decried for years. They always decry when someone else is doing it. These fundraising streams augmented Biden's $1.5 billion haul, in itself a record for a challenger to an incumbent president. So that amount of dark money dwarfs the $28.4 million spent on behalf of his rival, former President Donald Trump. So that's what that cost for Trump, supposedly $28.4 million to run. So he got $145 million for Biden dollars, $145 million to run from dark money donations. Great song, Democrats have said they want to ban dark money when others are using it as uniquely corrupting, since it allows supporters to quietly back a candidate without scrutiny. Yet in their effort to defeat Trump in 2020, they embraced it. It's not a bad little article, the same. Shows you where a lot of the money, some of the money did come through different organizations that have been set up in advance. I can remember when Bill Clinton was running, and towards the end it came out that millions, I don't know how much it was, but millions suddenly appeared to back him to run for president. And one of them was through a supposed I think it was Chinese Buddhist organization. That's what they claimed. That had only been set up not too long beforehand. That this is how the money was funneled to them. And that way they could get it from another country rather than say, well, this country is sending this money over. They could do it through a Buddhist religious organization. See, you wouldn't believe the scams that go on with the CIA at the top, of things. And the CIA, they're all amalgamated long ago. It doesn't matter who they are. You can't keep them out, could you? An evidence-based guide, and this is from, it's called Evidence Not Fear. It's not bad for a look up. I'm very careful with everything I look at, I tell you. I also know some of the bloggers that are out there, just like the Colour Revolutions I've mentioned, that send in the same thing across the States and elsewhere in Canada, and that they can set up and fund, and who jump on the Q bandwagon and help push it all too. That's a clue, So it's you got to understand they're going to be likable. They've got to put out a lot of the truth that's circulating amongst the underground, put it that way, and they will. And then they add on their little nonsense onto it, like Q and so on, and discredit everybody else who's sticking to the bare facts. That's how counterintelligence works. But lots of them sprung up over the last couple of years or so, 2 or 3 years, and already had their big ones all taken over long ago, mind you, for the main propaganda outlets. China health experts call for suspension of COVID vaccines. That's the ones, as Norway investigates the 33 deaths, that's what I'm saying. And Germany probes 10 deaths as well. So I'll put that one up as well. And they have links to the RNA vaccines that were used, and it gives you the links from the Global Times newspaper, etc. They give you these links to them to verify it. And also mentions Bloomberg reported that the number of deaths under investigations in Norway had risen to 33, and that all had occurred in people ranging from age 75 to 80. And Bloomberg's article said it's important to remember that about 45 people die every day in nursing homes in Norway. So it's not a given that this represents any excess mortality. There's a causal connection. Of course not. But however, the Norwegian Medicines Agency previously told Bloomberg that all of the deaths occurred in people who received the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, which until Friday was the only COVID vaccine approved for use in Norway. The Institute told Bloomberg that for those with the most severe frailty, the elderly and they're frail, even relatively mild vaccine side effects can have serious consequences. No kidding, eh? For those who have a very short remaining lifespan anyway, the benefit of the vaccine may be marginal or irrelevant. Well, why are they using it on them like guinea pigs? Oh. And it says the Institute also admitted to Global Times that the clinical trials that resulted in emergency approval of the vaccine included very few people over the age of 85. Were there any? I wonder. But added, we assume that the side effects will largely be the same in the elderly as in those over 65 years of age. Once you're over 50 odd years, you're plummeting with your immune system, its ability to recover from things and fight things off. So 65 to 75 to 85 is 20 years difference. So why would you expect the side effects be largely the same for those in the elderly as those in over 65 years of age? And according to Global Times, a Beijing-based immunologist who requested anonymity said the mRNA vaccines had not proven safe for large-scale use or for preventing infectious diseases. Noting that people over 80 have weaker immune systems, he said they should not receive the vaccine, but instead should take medicines to improve their immune system. Wouldn't it be more practical? Let's boost your immune system. Let's increase it. And it says in this article too that there's also 29 elderly people died at a nursing home in New York. According to a January 9th news report, there's a link here to the article too from the news report in Syracuse. It says a single nursing home in upstate New York vaccinated 193 residents beginning December 22nd and subsequently reported 24 deaths within the span of a couple of weeks. The facility attributed the deaths to a COVID-19 outbreak, even though there had been no COVID-19 deaths in any nursing homes in the entire county until the first 3 deaths were reported December 29. Remember the 56-year-old doctor, to the link is here for that one as well, who died of a rare autoimmune disease 15 days after getting the Pfizer vaccine. A Johns Hopkins scientist told the New York Times it was a medical certainty that the death was related to Pfizer's vaccine. Now that's the doctor, I believe, who was an obstetrician, a gynecologist. Very healthy, according to his wife, and he was a pro-vaccination. He volunteered to take it. And when he was admitted to hospital in a few days after, or a week or whatever, they said he had 0 platelets for clotting in his blood, the blood, 0 platelets, and he hemorrhaged to death. His immune system, like a cytokine storm, had altered to attack his own platelets in his body, which is a standard thing you'll get with this. I'm talking with vaccine injury, you often get that, because it's meant to alter your immune system. Then your immune system can start attacking itself, either the wrists or whatever, like rheumatoid arthritis, or the spine. As I say, that's what I got years ago from booster shots. Anyway, there you go. That's that one there. But folk have no idea that you're living through an amazing drama, a massive planned stage play. It's meant to stay with you forever and embed itself in your mind. A form of psychodrama, as I say. And it's definitely a psychodrama when it's coupled with fear, terror, daily spewed out from the television, incessantly. And what you're going through too is a wartime scenario, as I've mentioned, right? A war on COVID, including the TV series are bringing out too. It's a war, it's a war scenario, and all the medical staff are at war with this and at war with that. All these nasty viruses, all to save you, and rationing might come up. We've got to pull together and tighten our belts and yada, yada, yada. Yeah? Total lockdown, curfews in some places. It's just astonishing that they're using complete wartime scenarios for something to do, but it's nothing to do with invading people from another country. In a wartime reality, it's to do with a virus that literally they say you've got. Most folk won't even know if they've had it, and if you've had it and you recover, most folk recover. They say that you get more chance of being struck by lightning than you are with dying of COVID. Right? And yet they're wrecking entire economies worldwide to bring you, you'll bring you into total sustainability when you're on ration cards. I believe you me. And they'll start recirculating the old documentaries from the Path News on World War II. And here's your ration for the week, That's what they showed the British families. You could put the whole darn thing on a saucer. Here's your scraping of butter. Here's your one rasher of bacon. Here's your yada yada yada. Tell me malnourished people, starvation diets, and yet you're supposed to be happy as you actually help them by starving yourself almost to death for the greater good. See, they must always get you to comply voluntarily with what they want you to do, even when they want to blame you. They want to make sure that you're getting trained to blame yourself for existing. Well, yeah, I guess I don't really deserve to get treatment in the hospital. I'm pretty well useless now anyway, non-essential, and yeah, I'm useless, okay. And all that, and again, any slight raise that they found in the death, even though they've just come out with another article saying that the death really isn't any higher than any previous year. Other ones you'll see are slightly higher. Depends what statisticians looking at it. And again, too, the use of statisticians of so many vaccines given out. There's so many points. So and so's vaccines put out this day, and so this is straight out of the terminology you heard in Orwell's 1984 with loudspeakers, constantly telling about statistics, how we're winning this, and so many personal protection outfits, and blah 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 blah. So many syringes, so many needles, so many swabs. It's straight out of standard propaganda manuals. Straight out of it. But as I say, you're living through it, and the agenda is to be a life, like a world-changing agenda, not just a life-changing. But out of it comes total sustainability. No business is to be allowed to open unless they claim it's something. Who's the sustainable police that's going to come round and decide? They might not even have to see you. They probably do it all remotely. And we don't need you anymore. It's not sustainable, and you're not essential. So go away and die quietly, for goodness sake. Do the right thing, old boy. That's how they make you do it. But you're living through amazing times. You can't get all these things happening at the same time in the last year, even all at the same time for the big change. You can't also have them dancing on the tabletops, figuratively speaking, or from the World Health Organization, from the World Economic Forum, from the Club of Rome, from the CFR, and from the World Wildlife Fund. And all the other organizations to do with sustainability, but you couldn't have them all dancing with glee that they can ram all their agendas through together using COVID. And actually saying that we can do this using COVID rather than climate change. Now they're combining the two. It's just astonishing. And that's what tyranny is, folks. You would not close down economies that are causing more deaths, and that might count for any rise in deaths for treatable diseases, by the way. They can't get into hospital, as you well know. Thousands of them. They've got statistics from Britain and elsewhere on them. And you're supposed to just suffer it quite gladly because a couple of experts who obviously have CIA clearance too, if not in the CIA, it must be in the CIA actually, that level of working with biolabs like that, in charge of these things, telling you to stay at home and just tighten your belt. Here's some statistics here that are verified as well from the so-called experts. In at least 80% of the cases, the virus produces either no symptoms or a mild cold-like illness. The infection fatality rate for COVID-19 is 0.15% to 0.2%, which is close to the seasonal flu, which is around 0.1 to 0.2%. Children have a greater chance of being struck by lightning than dying of COVID-19. Adults are more likely to die in a car accident. Most of the population have no risk of dying from COVID-19. Studies show that 99.94% survive COVID-19 and will be resistant for a long time. So they've developed antibodies, you see. The people at risk from COVID-19 are clearly defined. And they're talking about the very elderly and comorbidities and so on, and should be protected with targeted measures. Children are not susceptible to it, nor do they transmit the virus. However, COVID-19 can be deadly for older and vulnerable people, so it's important to protect them. It'll help eliminate hospital overcrowding. Nevertheless, the average age of someone who dies from COVID-19 is 82.4 years. That's the average age, right, who dies of it, with comorbidities and so on. Comorbidities and their pre-existing condition. This is actually higher. So the ones who are dying are about 82.4 years, right? This is actually higher than the average life expectancy in Britain, which is 81.1 years. So there you go. Lockdowns prevent population immunity because the more it spreads and you don't get the symptoms or it's very mild, you end up getting immunity to it, you see, long term. But I was interested from the beginning too that Fauci and the rest of them completely dismissed the idea of catching it and getting your own immunity to it. It was just astonishing because the agenda was always from the beginning, vaccination. That doesn't, nothing else would work there, or, as far as you're concerned, which is rubbish because everyone who's had a PCR test and then a negative one has now got antibodies, if the PCR tests even work, you know. Yeah, but what has facts got to do with big agendas, eh? It's just astonishing that folk, unfortunately, are listening to television and that campaign of terror on them it really is driving folk mad and making them ill, definitely ill. And lots of folk are terrified to even attempt to go to a hospital And just like the last time it happened last spring, they were dying at home in pain and all the rest of it, and they're told to stay there, not come into the hospital. They couldn't even get painkillers. That's how they really. That's your caring authorities for you. Yeah, I'm afraid you have to die at home in pain, because if you come to hospital, you might bring COVID with you or catch you in the hospital. And say, here you are in agony. Isn't that terrible? Our caring society. The same politicians that gave all your factories and ability to maintain a nation through work and employment, gave it all away through free trade agreements and made you pay for it all. They really care about you, don't they? They really do care, yeah. Mm-hmm. Everything's managed by script writers for perception management. Everything you see and read or hear. What a disgusting display. I just hope people will record so much of this that down the road, just like the character Winston in 1984, leaving a message to the people of the future to tell them what happened in the past in his age. I hope you're keeping records for this to show people down the road what was done to them, to bring them into a post-consumerist society and to minimalistically, actually it's not sustainable. They want depopulation, don't they? The withdrawal of food, energy, all these kind of things, the withdrawal, bring you back into a 19th century state of living, poor hygiene, cold, etc. And you watch the same old childhood diseases suddenly emerge, which are really to do with bad hygiene and bad malnutrition, etc., poor nutrition. This has all been disclosed by them before on their wish lists. So anyway, hang in there and don't fall for everybody who's remaking themselves right now on the net or whatever, as they pretend had nothing to do with setting up that setup at Capitol building. It was a setup for sure. And remember that the whole world's against a stage, right? And you're watching the biggest show on earth for a bigger agenda, a huge, all-encompassing world agenda to be rammed through. And folk have to regain their individuality and learn what that tongue is for once again, to be used for any changes to occur for the good, no doubt about it. Help each other out, no doubt about that too. But you got to do it, folks. Have small clusters to help each other out in bad times. As the lockdowns get worse and worse, and certain folk will they're going to ban you from driving on the road. They've already said that they don't want to do away with the combustion engine, because that was always the agenda for the 21st century. No private vehicles to be owned, huh? And it's when they're going to start just on one part and keep changing the goalposts to include more and more and more. But they're starting with the gasoline engine and to get them off the road. And then, of course, eventually you're left with electric cars, which honestly, in Canada, northern Canada, here in the cold, they won't hold their charge for that long. How many people out there can afford to change the batteries every 4 years? Multi-thousands of dollars. It's not intended you on forever, you see, that way. Agenda for the 21st century wanted essential vehicles only. You'll be locked down your own community. Be part of your community. Here's the boundaries to your community, you see. That's how it's all been set up in advance. You're being forced into it now with different guises. And it must be believable, you see. And you've been ordered now to believe it or else. All of it. I mean, all of it. Absolutely all of it. So it's quite fascinating to live through it and watch the bizarre of almost the strange hallucinogenic presentation of it all. That's really what it is, isn't it? With the psychic driving. And being told not to think for yourself and not to come to conclusions that you would come to by observing this and that, but believe what they tell you, and then they're threatening you. If you get wrong perceptions, they're going to threaten you. You can't have those perceptions. That's forbidden. The thought police, indeed. Yeah. And the whole social credit score system is there. It's there, folks. You know. And you always find at the end of anything, you always only have each other help each other out. That's it. If you think that government's going to keep dishing cash out to you without asking for anything back, well, good luck. Good luck. I don't know what fairy stories you were brought up on, but eventually the piper calls the tune, as they say, and you dance to the tune. And each thing you accept from government is a condition. You don't realize there's conditions to everything. And they'll be wanting the cash back one way or another, or demanding you do certain things. Or else. It's like blackmail in a sense. If you want this, not blackmail, but coercion is what the real term for it. If you want this, then here's the conditions to it. And here's all the hoops you have to jump through. And here's the things you must agree to. You see? What an amazing time. You got to admit it's an amazing time, isn't it? To witness it all. As I said in 2001, the hardest thing will be to hold on to your sanity, because I saw all the changes we're going to ram through. And here it all is. And remember, too, I'm going to put up some links to short documentaries where people in their fields of expertise, mainly doctors and so on, discuss what's happening today with the pandemic. And also another one, too, is called 10 Steps to Genocide. It's really interesting to see how what's happening today has happened in the past, because there are definite sequences of formula introduced step by step to bring in you always demonize an enemy and go through different steps, ostracize them from all the rights that they have within a society, expel them from having free speech and things like that, demonize them, and then of course you end up with what's generally thought about as being the unthinkable. This unthinkable thing has happened even in ancient times to the present, because it's definitely a formula, and we're witnessing it today. We've been witnessing it for a long, long time. Even in the 90s, it was rather evident building up to it from the actual authorities, because genocides on any particular people happen from at the top down. So it's interesting. I'll put it up, 10 Steps to Genocide. And you can look up the histories of genocide for yourselves. Anyway, remember, folks, send a few bucks my way, cuttingthroughthematrix.com. You'll see how to do it there, how to send it to me. And I can't get the books out just yet because we're total lockdown, right? Non-essential. Yeah. But eventually we'll get them through some way or another. So just have patience and hang in there. We're all hanging in there, aren't we? So from myself, Alan Watt from Ontario, Canada, it's good night, and may your God or your gods go with you.